I've hiked the same ridge trail outside my town for over 10 years. I could walk it blindfolded, feeling the rhythm of the turns in my knees, hearing the creak long before it breaks through the trees. I know where the moss thickens on the north side, where the oaks give way to hemlocks, and where the slope curls east toward the granite outcrop that overlooks the valley. It's my ritual, my way to clear the noise after long weeks of work. That morning, the forest looked different. Not wrong, but expectant. The air was clean and cold, the kind that carries sound farther than it should. When I parked my car at the usual pull-off, I noticed how still it was. No birds. No wind. The frost on the windshield melted in perfect stillness. It was early spring, and the forest was supposed to be waking up, but it felt like it was holding its breath. I slung my pack over my shoulder, boots crunching on gravel, and followed the trail to the entrance. The wooden sign marking the ridge trail was faded and familiar. Beneath it, though, was something I'd never seen before, a new post, freshly dug into the soil, with a small brown sign nailed to it. The paint was clean, the letters sharp. Ravens Loop, 4.3 miles. I frowned. There was no Ravens Loop here. I'd never seen it on any map, any hiking app. It wasn't there last weekend, I was sure of it. The sign pointed toward a narrow path that split from the main trail and disappeared into dense brush. I crouched to look at the dirt. The soil was smooth, soft, almost manicured. No footprints, no tire marks, not even deer tracks. The earth looked untouched, as if no one had ever set foot on it. For a minute, I stood there debating. Maybe it was new, added by the Park Service. But they usually post notices, or at least leave ribbons for survey markers. I'd seen nothing like that lately. Curiosity is a dangerous kind of gravity. It pulls without warning. I told myself I'd follow it for just a bit to see where it joined the ridge trail again, or if it was just a short loop for day hikers. The moment I stepped onto that new path, I felt something subtle shift in the air. The temperature dropped a few degrees, like walking from sunlight into shadow. The smell changed too, from the dry, crisp scent of oak leaves to something rich and wet, like turned soil after rain. The forest here felt older. The trees grew closer together, trunks swollen with moss. Ferns crowded the ground, bending under their own weight. The path wound gently upward, smooth and clear, without a single root or fallen branch to trip over. It was almost too clean. After 10 minutes, the sound of the road was gone. The forest swallowed it completely. Every step echoed faintly, as if the ground were hollow beneath me. I slowed down, glancing back now and then to make sure I could still see the entrance, but the trees had already closed behind me. A small part of me wanted to turn back, but the deeper I went, the more hypnotic the trail became. It curved through the landscape like it had always been there. Natural, inevitable. I passed a small clearing where the sunlight filtered through in pale shafts. In the center stood a single birch tree, perfectly white and smooth, as if untouched by insects or weather. Someone had carved a mark into it, a circle intersected by a vertical line. It was precise, almost mathematical. I traced it with my fingertip. The bark was cold. For a second, I thought I felt it pulse, like the faint rhythm of a heartbeat beneath the surface. I jerked my hand back and told myself I was imagining it. Further ahead, I noticed something else strange. The forest floor had no decay, no fallen branches, no rot, no insect noise. The leaves looked freshly dropped, even though many trees still had none. Everything here seemed caught between seasons, trapped in some loop of endless stillness. After maybe an hour, I realized I hadn't seen any signs of wildlife. No squirrels darting up trunks, no birds flitting between branches. The silence had weight. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. Then, faintly, came the sound of running water. A stream, maybe. I followed the trail toward it, my boots sinking slightly into soft moss. When I reached the source, I stopped cold. It wasn't a stream. It was a narrow channel of water, clear as glass, running straight as a line through the forest, perfectly straight. The bed was lined with smooth stones that looked almost placed, like tiles. The water moved silently, unnaturally calm, without a single ripple. I crouched beside it, dipping my hand in. The temperature was icy. The current felt strong, stronger than it looked. When I pulled my hand out, a faint reddish mark wrapped around my wrist, like something had brushed against me under the surface. A rustle came from behind. I spun around. Nothing, just the same trees, unmoving. But when I looked back down, the channel was gone. Only moss and dry leaves where it had been, as if it had never existed. My heart pounded. I stood there breathing shallowly, staring at the ground. I knew I'd seen it. I wasn't tired. I wasn't dehydrated. I'd touched that water. I could still feel the cold burning in my skin. I turned back toward the way I'd come. The path looked the same, but when I took a few steps, I noticed the sunlight had shifted completely. It was lower now, red and dull. It couldn't have been more than an hour or two since I'd started, but it looked like dusk. That's when I saw the sign, a small wooden plank nailed to a post beside the trail. The wood was older here, dark, cracked, the letters carved deep. I stepped closer. My name was carved into it. First and last, exact spelling. I froze. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank. But who would know I'd come here today? My car was alone at the pull-off. No one else knew about this trail. I stared at it for a long time. The grooves of the letters looked weathered, not freshly carved. As if they'd been there for years. That's when the woods went completely silent. Even the wind stopped. I felt it then, a pressure in my chest, subtle but growing. The sense that I wasn't alone, that something just beyond my sight was watching, waiting. I took one step back, and the air seemed to hum. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration under my skin. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, something echoed, a single, heavy footstep. I don't know why, but I called out, "Hello?" The echo came again, closer. I turned and ran. Branches clawed at my jacket, roots rose like hands from the ground. I could hear my own breath tearing from my throat, echoing too loud in the dead air. I didn't look back. When I reached the ridge trail again, the signpost was gone. The dirt was unbroken, the ground smooth, just the old wooden ridge sign, the one I'd known for years. I stood there shaking, staring at the spot where the new trail had been. There was nothing, just trees and brush. No path, no post. But when I looked down at my wrist, the red mark was still there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sign again, the one carved with my name. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd missed some explanation, a trick of the light, a hiker's prank, but there was no logic that fit. It was the same name, same spelling, etched into aged wood like it had been waiting for me. I told myself I'd go back in the morning to check again, to prove the path was gone, to prove it had been some kind of illusion. But I didn't set an alarm. I lay in bed with the curtains drawn, listening to the wind outside and the faint creaks of the house settling. Each sound seemed to stretch and echo longer than normal, as though the quiet itself had changed shape since that hike. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamt I was walking that path again. The forest pressed close, the ground slick and soft underfoot. I could hear water running beneath me, just beneath, like the trail was floating over a hidden river. Then I heard the footstep again, slow and deliberate, matching mine in rhythm but not in timing. Each time I stopped, it kept moving. I woke with my pulse racing, the sheets damp with sweat. The room smelled faintly of wet earth. By morning, sunlight had returned to its normal pale warmth, cutting through the fog on the windows. I convinced myself to go back. If I didn't, that trail would live in my mind like an unfinished sentence. When I reached the ridge, everything looked ordinary again. Cars lined the pull-off. A few hikers chatted near the entrance. The sign for the ridge trail stood in its usual place, gray and weathered, but the new post was gone. No Raven's Loop, no split in the underbrush, no hint of the path that had been there the day before. I crouched, scanning the ground. The soil was undisturbed, coated in last night's rain. No footprints, no drag marks from where a signpost could have been pulled. I even brushed aside a few leaves. It was just earth beneath. Still, I knew what I'd seen. The feeling of stepping into that place hadn't been a dream. It had weight. I started along the ridge trail, half expecting to find another marker somewhere deeper in, maybe where the two paths had once diverged. The forest was calm now, birds calling from the canopy, squirrels darting across the path. It was almost too normal. A couple of miles in, I stopped at the outcrop overlooking the valley. The air was sharp and bright. From here, you could see the tree line stretching endlessly in green and gray folds. But something caught my eye far below, a patch of lighter earth, perfectly round like a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small field. I'd never noticed it before. I took out my binoculars. The clearing was ringed with trees, their tops leaning inward like a crown. In the center stood a single white trunk, the birch tree. I lowered the binoculars, my throat tightening. I remembered exactly where that birch had been. The clearing wasn't supposed to be visible from here. It had been deep in the woods, far from the ridge's edge. But there it was, plain as day. I stared for a long time, and the longer I looked, the less natural the clearing seemed. The light above it didn't move like it should have. It shimmered faintly, like heat mirage, though the air was cool. When I finally turned away, something flickered at the edge of my vision. A flash of white against the trees. I whipped my head around, but the forest was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just stepped back behind the trunks, just out of sight. I tried to shake it off, continuing the loop trail back toward my car, but the forest had gone quiet again. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but alert. I felt watched. At one point, I stopped and listened. A faint noise drifted through the trees. Not wind. It was rhythmic, like someone whispering under their breath. I couldn't make out words, just a cadence, a low murmur that rose and fell. "Hello?" I called, voice thin in the air. The whispering stopped immediately. Then came a sharp crack of a branch snapping, not far behind me. I turned and scanned the trees. A squirrel darted along a limb. But this sound hadn't come from that. It had been lower, deliberate, heavy. I felt an instinct I couldn't reason with, a pull to keep moving forward, not to look back again. The kind of instinct that tells you you're being followed. By the time I reached the parking lot, the other cars were gone. The sun had dipped behind clouds. When I opened my trunk to throw my pack inside, something slid out from under it, a wooden splinter about the length of my finger. Old, gray wood. The end was carved with a faint curve, almost like part of a letter. I picked it up, and that same humming pressure filled my chest again. I dropped it quickly, heart hammering. It landed on the ground with a soft tap. I left it there and drove home. That night, I couldn't bring myself to unpack my gear. My boots sat by the door, crusted with dried mud. When I turned on the porch light, I noticed streaks of red near the soles. For a second, I thought it was rust. But when I touched it, it smeared. It was the same faint reddish mark that had appeared on my wrist the day before. I checked the bathroom mirror. The mark was still there too. Slightly darker now, like it had sunk deeper under the skin. When I pressed it, it tingled like a low electric pulse. I turned off the lights and sat by the window, staring at the tree line beyond the yard. The forest looked impossibly still, a solid wall of shadow. Then, just as I started to close the blinds, I saw it, a faint light deep between the trees. Not a flashlight, more like the glow of moonlight reflected off water. It shimmered faintly, moving between trunks, slow and steady as if pacing. And then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw something else. Someone standing behind me. I spun around. No one. But the smell hit me instantly. Wet earth, moss, and something metallic beneath it. When I looked back out the window, the light in the forest was gone. The next morning, the mark on my wrist had deepened to a faint bruise. It was shaped like a ring, imperfect, uneven, as though something had gripped me. I didn't remember sleeping, only slipping in and out of restless half-dreams, filled with the sound of moving water and a low hum that seemed to come from under my bed. I told myself I needed proof, evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. So I packed my camera, a GPS tracker, and a small hand axe. It wasn't courage that sent me back to the trail. It was obsession. Something about that forest felt unfinished, as though I'd walked out halfway through a sentence. When I reached the ridge lot, the day was overcast. Mist clung to the trees, rolling between them like slow breath. Only one other car was parked nearby, an old white pickup streaked with mud. The ridge trail looked the same, but the air felt heavier. I started up the incline, my boots muffled by the wet soil. Every so often, I checked the GPS on my phone, marking my route, making sure I wasn't being misled by memory. About a mile in, I stopped. The woods to my right seemed darker, deeper. And though I saw no trail marker, I felt the split, the faint echo of where Raven's Loop had begun. The air there was colder. The trees pressed closer together. I stepped off the main path, pushing through brush that clawed at my sleeves. The ground dipped slightly, then leveled out. When I glanced at my phone, the signal vanished. The compass spun twice, then froze. That's when I saw the birch tree. It stood just ahead, tall and white, the bark smooth as bone. The mark I'd seen before, the circle with a line through it, was still there. But now there was something beneath it, a set of initials carved deep, almost burned into the wood. Mine. I touched the carving. The bark was cold again, wet with sap. My fingers came away red, like blood had welled from the grooves. And behind me I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, just beyond the nearest trunks. I turned, scanning the underbrush. Nothing moved, but the air shifted, as though something had just stepped back. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Who's there?" I called, voice tight. The forest didn't answer. Then I realized the forest wasn't silent, it was listening. Every sound I made seemed to hang in the air longer than it should, stretching thin before fading. A flicker caught my eye to the left. Between two trees, a small wooden sign leaned at an angle. I moved closer, and my stomach dropped. It was the same weathered plank from before, the one carved with my full name. But the letters were fresher now, the grooves pale and raw, as if someone had recut them overnight. The smell of wet wood and soil thickened until it was hard to breathe. I stepped back, and my boots sank into mud that hadn't been there a moment ago. When I pulled free, a dark print of my soul filled instantly with thin, clear water. That same hum began again, faint at first, then building until I could feel it in my teeth. The sound wasn't coming from above or around me. It was coming from below. I crouched and pressed my palm against the ground. The vibration trembled up through my bones. There was something moving under the forest floor. Slow, massive, steady as a heartbeat. I stumbled back, gasping for air. The trees around me looked different now, taller. The bark blackened as if scorched. The sky above had dimmed to an unnatural twilight. Then I heard the water again. It trickled from somewhere ahead, the same sound as before, that impossible straight channel. I followed it, stepping carefully between roots and stones. When I reached the edge, I stopped dead. There it was again, the narrow stream running perfectly straight like a wound through the earth. But this time, the water wasn't clear. It was dark, almost black, and the reflection wasn't mine. When I leaned closer, I saw another face looking up, a pale version of me, expressionless, eyes open, but still. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The reflection didn't move with me. It stayed, watching, as though my image was trapped beneath the surface. The hum grew louder until it drowned out everything else. The ground beneath my feet shifted, and for a moment I thought the forest itself was breathing. Then came a whisper, soft, familiar, right beside my ear. "You came back." I froze. The voice was mine. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I tore through the trees, branches slashing my face, the weight of the forest pressing close. The hum followed me, growing sharper, almost electric, until it filled the air with a static crackle. When I burst through the brush, I was back on the ridge trail, the normal one. The hum stopped instantly, leaving my ears ringing in the sudden quiet. I stood there shaking, gulping air, the world spinning around me. The trail was ordinary again, birds, wind, sunlight filtering through branches. It could have been any normal afternoon, except my GPS was dead. My phone battery, full when I started, was drained to 0. And when I checked the time, it was almost 6 p.m. I'd left my car at 9 that morning, 7 hours gone. I didn't remember most of it, only flashes, the birch tree, the voice, the reflection. The rest felt erased, as though the forest had swallowed those hours whole. I drove home on autopilot, staring straight ahead. Every curve of the road looked wrong, stretched somehow, like I was seeing it through warped glass. When I finally reached my driveway, the sun had already set. I sat there in silence for a long time, engine idling, headlights cutting through the mist. That's when I noticed the mud on my boots again, dark, thick, and glistening. I leaned closer. Embedded in the mud were small fragments of wood, each one carved with faint, straight lines. Letters. When I wiped them clean, I could make out parts of words, my name again, over and over. That night, the dreams returned. I stood in that impossible clearing, staring at the birch tree, but now dozens of signs surrounded it, circling outward like gravestones. Each one bore a name, different handwriting, different ages, but all with the same family name as mine. And in the dream, I realized something I hadn't before. The circle carved on the birch, the one crossed by a vertical line, wasn't a symbol. It was a trail marker, and the line wasn't through it. It was leading down. I woke to the sound of dripping, a slow, steady rhythm from somewhere inside the house. For a moment, I didn't move, just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to tell if it was rain or something else. Then I remembered it hadn't rained in days. When I turned on the lamp, the light flickered weakly. The sound was coming from the hallway. I got up, the floor cold under my feet, and followed it. A small puddle had formed beneath the coat rack. The water was clear but smelled faintly of soil, like a stream bed. I reached up and froze. My hiking jacket hung there, dripping steadily. It was soaked through, though I hadn't worn it since the hike. The scent of moss filled the air, damp and heavy. I touched the sleeve. It was freezing. Something clinked softly in the pocket. I reached in and pulled out a piece of wood, thin, weathered, carved with one word, return. My mouth went dry. I dropped it instantly, heart pounding, and backed away. The piece hit the floor with a hollow knock, like the sound of a door closing far away. I tried to calm myself, but every nerve in me buzzed with that same low vibration I'd felt in the woods. I could feel it in the air now, subtle but constant, like the world around me was humming on a frequency just beyond hearing. Sleep wasn't an option. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started researching. I dug through old maps, satellite images, local archives, anything mentioning Raven's Loop. There was nothing. No records, no reports, not even rumors. The Ridge Trail had been mapped a dozen times, and that area showed nothing but solid forest. But in one old survey from 1972, there was a faint mark in pencil near the western edge of the forest. It wasn't labeled, just a small circle with a vertical line through it. The same symbol carved into the birch. I drove back before dawn. The mist was thick enough to blur the trees into ghosts. When I reached the trailhead, my headlights cut across the sign, and this time, the second post was there again. Raven's Loop, 4.3 miles. Pristine, new, exactly as before. My hands trembled as I shut off the engine. I don't know why I didn't just leave. Maybe I needed to know how far it went, where it ended. Maybe some part of me already understood it didn't end at all. I followed the path again, counting my breaths, watching my GPS flicker uselessly. The deeper I went, the older the forest became. Bark thick like armor, ferns large as my chest. The air grew cooler, the light thinner. After a while, I began to hear it, the water, running somewhere beneath the ground. Not fast, but steady, like veins pulsing through the soil. I passed the birch again. The carvings had multiplied. Not just my initials now, rows of names carved over each other in layers so deep the bark had split open. Some were nearly worn away, some freshly cut. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I whispered to no one, "What is this place?" The hum beneath the soil answered. The trees around me seemed to bend imperceptibly, as if listening. I forced myself onward. The trail wound into a shallow ravine, the walls slick with moss. The air here was colder, damp enough to cling to my clothes. At the bottom, the ground leveled out into that same perfect channel. Only this time it wasn't a narrow cut. It had widened into a small stream flowing black and soundless. On the far bank stood a wooden sign, half sunken into the earth. I stepped closer and aimed my light. It read, "Welcome back." Beneath the words, faint scratches had been carved, hundreds of them, layered and chaotic like fingernails dragged across the wood. I crouched by the water's edge, shining my light across the surface. The reflection came instantly, my face again, pale and still, but this time something moved behind it, a shape, slow and enormous, rising like a shadow from below. The hum deepened until I could feel it in my ribs. I stumbled backward as something broke the surface, a hand, pale, swollen, with soil packed beneath the nails. It reached upward, not grasping but feeling, as if searching for the air. I turned to run, but the forest around me had changed. The path behind was gone, replaced by roots and brambles thick as wire. Every direction looked the same. The hand sank back beneath the water, leaving no ripple. I screamed, loud, raw, just to hear a sound that wasn't that hum, and somewhere in the distance I heard a faint echo of it. My voice, but wrong. Slower, lower. I stumbled toward it, desperate for any sense of direction, until I broke through into the clearing. The birch stood in the center again, its trunk gleaming white, even in the dim light. Around it were the signs, the ones from my dream. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all half buried in the moss, carved with names. The smell of wet soil and rot was suffocating. My knees gave out. I fell forward, hands sinking into mud that pulsed faintly with each heartbeat of the earth. That's when I saw the newest sign, clean wood, freshly carved, lying flat at the base of the birch. The letters were deep, dark with sap, my name again. But beneath it, another line had been added. Date of return, April 13th. My throat went dry. That was today. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over one of the older markers. My flashlight flickered, then died, and from the darkness came the sound of something moving, slow, wet steps circling the clearing. The voice followed, whispering softly from all directions at once. You left the first time. You don't leave twice. The forest trembled. I could feel it breathing again, each inhale pulling the air from my lungs. The ground shifted under me, soil cracking open, water seeping through in thin veins of lightless current. The last thing I saw before I ran was the birch tree itself, the pale bark splitting open like skin, revealing something dark and glistening underneath, and for a moment I swear I saw an eye there. It blinked. I don't remember how far I ran. Only the sounds, the soft slap of mud under my boots, the frantic rasp of my breath, the pulse of that humming under the earth, following me like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The forest didn't move right anymore. The trunks shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. The ground dipped and rose as if I were running across something alive. Every few seconds, I heard a faint crack somewhere behind me, like branches breaking under careful, heavy footsteps that always stopped just as I turned to listen. I knew I wasn't alone out there, but what terrified me more was the certainty that whatever followed wasn't entirely outside of me either. It was in the air, in the dirt, in my bones now. When the trees finally thinned and I saw the faint line of my car's headlights through the fog, I almost sobbed. I stumbled out of the brush, covered in mud, shaking so hard my knees nearly gave out. The trailhead was there again, just as it should be. But the second signpost, the one that had said Raven's Loop, was still there too. Only now the lettering had changed. The brown paint was gone, peeled away by moisture or time, revealing the words burned into the wood beneath. Trail closed. I don't remember unlocking my car or starting the engine. One moment I was staring at that sign, and the next, I was halfway down the gravel road, headlights bouncing across the darkness. The forest pressed close on both sides, the trees impossibly tall. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the entrance was gone. I drove straight through the night, not daring to look away from the road. Every shadow looked wrong. Once or twice, I thought I saw someone standing in the headlights ahead, a tall figure in a soaked jacket. But each time, it turned out to be only branches or mist. When I finally reached town, dawn was bleeding pale light across the rooftops. The gas station at the edge of Main Street was open, and I pulled in just to see another human being to prove the world was still real. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes, stared at me as I walked in, mud still dripping from my clothes. "Rough morning, huh?" she said carefully. I just nodded. Where you coming from? The Ridge Trail? I muttered. You know it? Her expression changed. Just a flicker, but enough to notice. You mean Hollow Ridge? Yeah, I said. You ever heard of a new one up there? Raven's Loop? She frowned. Can't say I have. Been here 30 years. They stopped adding new trails after that. Thing in the 80s. What thing? She hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. A ranger went missing out there. Never found him. Folks said he was mapping a new trail, but when the other rangers went looking, there wasn't one. Just trees. No sign he'd ever been there. My skin went cold. What was his name? She squinted, trying to remember. It's been too long. But I think it started with the same first name as yours. I left without buying anything. Back home, I showered for nearly an hour, but the smell of soil and moss clung to my skin. When I checked my wrist, the mark had spread. It wasn't red anymore. It was dark, like a shadow beneath the surface. When I pressed it, it throbbed faintly in rhythm with the same subterranean hum I'd felt in the forest. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the birch tree splitting open again, the pale eye blinking from within. I tried to write everything down, to make sense of it, but the words kept slipping. When I looked at the page, the letters seemed to shift slightly, forming patterns that looked too much like that circle and line symbol. That night, I dreamed of the clearing again, the signs, the endless loop of names. Only this time, there was someone kneeling beside the birch, hammering a new plank into the soil. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were humming, the same low tone I'd heard in the ground. When they turned toward me, the light fell across their face. It was me. I woke to darkness, not the ordinary kind, the kind that feels thick, solid, almost liquid. The air smelled of wet bark and stagnant water. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't on the nightstand. My fingers brushed dirt instead. When I sat up, I wasn't in my bed. I was sitting on cold earth. My flashlight, my hiking one, lay beside me, faintly glowing. I was back in the forest. The clearing stretched before me, bathed in a weak, sourceless light. The birch tree towered in the center, its bark slick with moisture. Around it, the signs stood like sentinels, perfectly arranged. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. My heart felt like it was being squeezed from the inside. Then I saw movement. Something was crawling out from beneath the roots of the birch. Not an animal, something shaped like a person, but the skin looked soft and colorless, like clay that hadn't set. Its face was blank at first, but as it lifted its head, features began to form: nose, mouth, eyes, shaping themselves from the surface like something remembering how to be human. It looked exactly like me. It smiled. "Go home," it said in my voice, calm and steady. "You've already been here." I stumbled backward, tripping over one of the signs. My hand landed on another plank, and my fingers traced the letters carved into it before I realized what I was touching. My name again. But this time, the date beneath it wasn't today. It was next week. I woke screaming, sitting bolt upright in my own bed, drenched in sweat. The morning light was streaming through the curtains. I was home again. Floor clean, no dirt, no mud. For a long time, I just sat there, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was just another nightmare. But when I looked down, there was mud under my fingernails. And on my nightstand, where my phone should have been, was a small wooden splinter, fresh, clean, and carved with that same circle and line. I stared at it for a long time, unable to move. The hum was faint again, pulsing somewhere far beneath the floorboards, patient and steady. I knew then the forest hadn't let me leave. It had just followed me home. The next few days dissolved into something that barely resembled life. I went to work, but the world felt distant, like watching a film through fogged glass. Conversations slipped past me. Food had no taste. And always, beneath everything, the hum. Faint, low, constant. At first, I thought it was the refrigerator or plumbing. But when I stood still long enough, I could feel it vibrating up through the floorboards in rhythm with my pulse. I started dreaming with my eyes open. I'd catch myself staring at patterns in the walls that weren't there seconds ago. Rings, Circles, thin lines cutting through them like a compass needle. Sometimes I'd blink, and they'd vanish. Sometimes they didn't. I stopped sleeping altogether after the third night. That's when I began hearing the other voice again, the one that sounded like mine. It started as a whisper in the static between radio stations, in the hum of appliances, in the rain hitting the window. Always the same words, soft and patient. Return. The trail doesn't end. By then, my wrist had turned completely black beneath the skin. The ring pulsed faintly in time with the hum. The center of it itched like something wanted to crawl out. I tried everything. Burning the wooden splinter, deleting the pictures from my phone, even leaving town for a night. But no matter how far I drove, the hum followed. When I crossed the county line, my headlights flickered, and for a brief second, the road ahead turned into a dirt path lined with trees. The birch appeared in my high beams before vanishing again into asphalt. That was the moment I stopped pretending this could be reasoned away. So I went back. It was near midnight when I parked at the ridge pull-off. Fog rolled across the road in slow sheets, swallowing sound. The forest waited beyond the guardrail, still and endless. I didn't bring a pack this time, or tools, just the flashlight and the small knife I kept in the glove compartment. I think some part of me already knew there wouldn't be a return trip. The air changed the second I stepped off the asphalt, colder, denser. The world behind me went silent, like sound itself had cut out. The sign was there again, Ravens Loop, 4.3 miles. But the letters were wrong this time, warped, slanted, like they'd been written by someone carving from memory. Beneath it, in smaller text, another message had been etched in crude strokes. Follow yourself. I took a deep breath and started walking. The trail unfolded exactly as before, pristine, ancient, impossible. The trees leaned inward, guiding me deeper. My footsteps made no sound. Even my breath felt stolen by the air. When I reached the clearing, I didn't hesitate. The birch tree waited, split wide, the dark hollow at its base glistening like an open mouth. The signs circled it, hundreds of names, thousands maybe. The earth pulsed faintly with that slow, patient rhythm. I knelt before it. The hum grew stronger until I thought my bones would crack from the pressure. The knife slipped from my hand. Useless. A sound rippled through the soil beneath me, something like a heartbeat. Then, slowly, something began to emerge from the opening in the birch. It wasn't a creature. It was light, thick, dark light like liquid shadow. It rose and shaped itself, forming vague limbs, a head, a face. My face. It smiled at me with a kind of weary pity. You found the end, it said quietly, in my own voice. I shook my head, trembling. What are you? I'm the part that didn't stop walking. It stepped closer, its form flickering like reflection on black water. We've been here before. All of us. You left once. You came back. You always come back. I don't want to. I whispered. It tilted its head. That's not how the trail works. The ground shuddered beneath us, the hum rising to a roar. Around the clearing, the signs began to vibrate, rattling softly like wind chimes. The birch creaked, its bark peeling in long strips. Why me? I shouted over the sound. Why my name? The other me smiled again, sad, almost human. Because it's not your name, it's the trail's. It just wears you for a while. Then it reached out and pressed its hand against my chest. The pain wasn't physical. It was deeper, like something unfolding inside my ribcage. For a moment, I saw everything. The channel of water, the hundreds of faces beneath its surface, the countless figures walking this same path across different times, all bleeding into one another like reflections in rippling glass. Every one of them had my eyes. When I gasped and stumbled backward, the world fractured. The clearing stretched and folded, trees bending like liquid. The ground gave way beneath me, and I fell, not through soil, but through time, through echoes. I landed on solid earth. The forest was bright again, new, full of birdsong. The air smelled of spring. For a second, I thought I'd escaped. Then I saw the signpost ahead. Ravens Loop, 4.3 miles. It looked brand new. Fresh paint, clean wood. My car sat a few feet away, untouched, the same way it had the morning I first saw the trail. I staggered forward, shaking, calling out, but no sound came from my throat. My voice was gone. My body felt heavy, my limbs wrong. When I looked down, my wrist was bare, no mark, no bruise. Then I saw the figure walking up the trailhead. It was me. My clothes, my pack, my same cautious steps as I'd taken that first morning. I tried to scream to warn him, but the sound dissolved into the hum. He paused at the sign, reading it, frowning the same way I had. Then he stepped onto the path, and the forest swallowed him whole. I stood there unseen, unheard, watching myself vanish down the same trail that never existed yesterday. The air vibrated gently around me, the hum deepening into a voice I knew too well. It whispered one final word, return. And then the trees closed in again. The first night out there always feels like a slow exhale after weeks of noise. You feel it as soon as the road fades into gravel, as the pine trees crowd close and the static of the outside world starts to thin. I'd been camping in that part of the northern woods before, remote enough that the nearest gas station was almost an hour away, but this time the quiet felt heavier, as if something was waiting for us to disturb it. There were 4 of us. Old friends from work, each desperate for a break, each trying to outdo the others with stories about who was the better outdoorsman. We joked about it while setting up camp near the old logging trail, laughing too loudly, tossing around inside jokes that seemed to echo between the trees a little too long. But when the fire caught, the night pulled in close around it, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the wind stopped all at once. Like the forest was listening. It was late autumn, and the air was sharp enough to sting your lungs when you breathed too deeply. We built our tents close to the fire pit, laid out our gear, and unpacked enough food and beer for the weekend. The ranger station had warned us that the area used to be part of an old timber claim, decades abandoned, but full of strange little reminders. Rusted saw blades nailed to trees, half-buried tools, the remains of a sawmill somewhere deep past the ridge. We didn't think much of it. When you're out there, stories like that sound like local flavor, something to make the place feel more legendary. But the truth is, legends usually start because something once went wrong. And I think, even then, part of me knew this trip wasn't going to be like the others. We spent the first day exploring the creek that ran behind our camp, following it upstream until it disappeared into a mess of fallen timber and moss. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the forest was reclaiming everything man had ever done there. Sawdust had long turned to soil, iron was wrapped in vines. Even the air smelled old. We didn't talk much out there, not because we didn't want to, but because it felt like speaking too loudly might wake something. It wasn't until dusk that we made our way back. The shadows came fast, swallowing the trail before we reached camp, and I remember that sense of disorientation, the way every tree began to look the same, every bend in the path unfamiliar. When we finally saw the orange glow of our fire flickering through the branches, I felt relief deeper than I wanted to admit. That night, the forest was so still, it felt staged. No insects, no night birds, just the occasional crack of cooling wood in the fire. We sat in folding chairs, trading quiet stories, half drunk on whiskey and exhaustion. Someone mentioned how there weren't any other campers around. That struck us as odd. Usually by late fall, there were still hunters passing through or backpackers heading for the Ridge Trail. But that weekend, it was just us. Or at least that's what we thought. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of boots crunching through leaves. Slow, deliberate steps, maybe 20 feet away from my tent. I held my breath, listening. The steps stopped, then started again, circling. I unzipped the flap as quietly as I could, expecting to see one of my friends stumbling to the fire pit, but there was no one. Just the last ember of the fire glowing weakly. I waited for a flashlight beam, a voice. Something. Nothing came. The silence pressed in until I could hear my own pulse. When I finally stepped out, there were no footprints, just wet leaves, undisturbed. The next morning, everyone seemed off. No jokes. No bragging about who snored the loudest. We all felt it, the weird tension, like the woods were watching us. So we busied ourselves with practical things. We needed more firewood, and the logs we'd gathered were damp from the night air. I volunteered to hike up the ridge to find drier timber. That's when he spoke up, the quiet one in our group, the kind of guy who always wanted to prove himself. "I'll go," he said. "Need to stretch my legs." We told him to take his radio, but he waved it off. "Won't be long." He grabbed his hatchet, slung his backpack, and walked off into the trees. We watched him go, his flannel fading between the trunks until there was nothing but forest again. It was mid-morning. By noon, we started to worry. The ridge wasn't that far, and you can't wander forever in those woods without running into some landmark, a creek, a trail, a boundary marker. We called out his name a few times. No answer. We fired up the radio, but only static came through. One of us climbed a nearby hill to look for movement, but the forest below was still, a green and brown ocean stretching to the horizon. We told ourselves he probably took a break somewhere, maybe found a good grove of deadfall and was cutting it up. But by sunset, when the light began to thin and the temperature dropped, that confidence started to fade. We built the fire higher, kept calling his name until our voices went hoarse. When the sun went down, something changed. The forest that had been silent all day began to stir, but not with the normal sounds of night. It was rhythmic, hollow thuds echoing from deep within the trees, spaced evenly like someone splitting wood in the dark. We all heard it. None of us wanted to admit it. The sound went on for hours, steady, patient, like a heartbeat. Every so often it would stop, just long enough for us to think it was over, and then it would start again. By midnight, no one was speaking. We sat around the fire, staring into it, each of us trapped in the same fear, but too proud to say it out loud. At some point, I must have dozed off, because when I woke, the woods were quiet again. The fire was low. My mouth was dry from the cold. For a long time, I just sat there, waiting for dawn, praying that the first light would make everything make sense again. But when the sky finally turned gray and the trees emerged from shadow, I saw something that made my stomach drop. In the clearing beyond our camp, arranged in a perfect circle, were stacks of firewood, dozens of them. Each log was freshly cut, edges clean and bright, as if they'd been split just hours ago, and on top of every stack, every single one, was a single bloody fingerprint. And he was nowhere to be found. None of us spoke for what felt like minutes. The kind of silence that doesn't come from shock alone, but from the dawning awareness that something fundamental had gone wrong, something beyond what we could reason through. The stacks were so neat, so intentional. The wood glistened faintly with dew, each piece split with precision, almost reverence. I remember stepping closer despite my body screaming not to. The prints were small, almost delicate, as if pressed there with care rather than violence. The blood hadn't dried yet. It was dark, still tacky when I brushed my glove against one of them. My stomach turned. That was when I realized every pile was positioned facing inward, toward the empty center of the circle, where the ground had been cleared of leaves and brush. We started calling his name again. Louder this time, desperate. One of us fired a flare, but it only lit up the hollow around us in a pale red wash, throwing the trees into impossible shapes. Nothing moved. The air was thick with that damp forest smell, earth and iron, and I swear I could feel something vibrating just beneath it, like a low hum you can't quite hear but that your bones recognize. One of the guys, he was always the skeptic, said it had to be a prank. Maybe someone else was out here. Maybe our friend had wandered off and some hunter stumbled across our camp and decided to scare us. But there were no other tracks leading in or out of the clearing, just ours and his. We decided to mark the spot and head back to the ranger station once the sun was fully up. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were afraid to go deeper into the woods. So we packed our gear in silence, glancing at that circle every few minutes, half expecting to see him walk back through it like nothing had happened. But he didn't. The hike out felt wrong. The forest seemed unfamiliar, as if the trail itself had shifted overnight. I remember the sound of our boots on the damp ground, the only sound. Even the birds stayed quiet. When we finally reached the truck, the relief should have hit us hard. But it didn't. It felt empty, mechanical. We drove to the ranger outpost without speaking. The ranger on duty was an older guy, lean and weathered, with a permanent squint from years under the sun. When we told him what we'd found, his expression didn't change at first. But when I described the stacks, the way they were arranged, the fingerprints, he just looked out the window for a long time. Finally, he said something I'll never forget. "You found them again." He wouldn't elaborate. He just radioed for backup and told us to stay put. When another ranger arrived, they both spoke in hushed tones outside, glancing toward the woods. Eventually, they loaded up their gear and told us they'd take a team to the site, but we were to head back to town and wait for a call. I wanted to go with them. Part of me needed to see it again, to understand what we'd stumbled into. But the look on that old ranger's face, something in it made me stop arguing. We checked into a cheap motel near the highway that night. None of us could sleep. We sat on the edge of the beds, chain smoking, replaying every moment, trying to make sense of it. Around midnight, there was a knock at our door. It was one of the rangers, the younger one. He looked pale, like he hadn't blinked since leaving the woods. He said they'd found the circle exactly as we described it, untouched, no sign of our friend. But here's the part that didn't make sense. The prints on top of each stack weren't all the same size. Some were smaller, some were larger, too large. He said they glowed faintly under the flashlight beam, as if something in the blood was reflecting the light. Then he stopped himself, realizing how insane it sounded, and told us the investigation would continue in the morning. He advised us to go home. None of us did. We waited for a call that never came. When we went back to the station the next day, the old ranger was gone. The younger one claimed he'd transferred out overnight. No forwarding information, no explanation. Officially, the report listed our friend as missing under undetermined circumstances. Unofficially, we knew they didn't want people asking questions. Weeks passed. Winter came early that year. Snow buried the trail, sealed the clearing under white silence. But the story wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me into my dreams, the sound of splitting wood, the perfect rhythm of it echoing through the trees. Sometimes I'd wake to the smell of sap and iron, the same scent that hung in the air that morning. I started reading everything I could about the area. Old news clippings, folklore, ranger logs. That's when I found the pattern. Every decade or so, someone disappeared along that same stretch of forest. Hunters, hikers, loggers. Always one person from a group. Always in the fall. And sometimes, after the first snow melt, locals would find circles of wood left behind. Perfect stacks, untouched by animals or weather. There was one story from 1978 that froze me where I sat. A couple of forest workers had gone missing while surveying old timberland. When their team searched the area, they found dozens of fresh-cut logs arranged in a circle, each one marked with a single bloody print. One of the men who found the site said it looked less like a crime scene and more like an offering, like someone or something had completed a task that didn't belong to it. I never told the others what I found. We'd all agreed to stop talking about it, to move on, to protect ourselves from whatever it was that still lingered in those woods. But sometimes, when I'm out hiking alone, I still catch the smell of fresh-cut pine, even when there's no sawdust, no campfire, nothing but untouched wilderness. That scent makes me stop and listen. And in that silence, I swear I can hear it again, that slow, steady rhythm of a hatchet splitting wood in the distance. If there's one thing I've learned since that trip, it's that the forest remembers. It holds on to everything, the footsteps, the whispers, the promises we make when we think no one's listening. It gives back what we take, just not always in the way we expect. I used to think camping was about escaping civilization, about finding solitude and peace in nature. But solitude can be a mirror. It shows you what's missing in you, what you've ignored. And sometimes, if you stay too long, it shows you what's waiting. I still go out there, though. I can't stop. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's the need to understand. But every time I light a fire in the woods, I can feel the edge of something ancient watching from the tree line, waiting for me to make the same mistake he did, to wander off, thinking the forest is just trees and wind. So I keep the fire high, keep the axe sheathed, and I never ever leave camp alone after dark. Because somewhere out there, past the ridge where the moss covers the old logging scars, there's a circle that keeps growing. Each autumn, a few new stacks appear, fresh, clean, deliberate. And if you listen close enough when the night goes still, you'll hear it too. The sound of someone still working, still collecting, one perfect log at a time. Fear changes shape in the woods. It doesn't always arrive with claws or a scream. Sometimes it moves quiet, learning your rhythm before you even notice it's there. In the weeks after that trip, I kept replaying everything I could remember. The moment he stepped away from camp, the look he gave me before disappearing into the trees. There was something calm about it, almost peaceful, like he was walking towards something that had already called his name. And that thought still bothers me. Not the mystery of what took him, but the possibility that he didn't run or fight, that maybe he recognized what the rest of us never could. I spent the next spring hiking smaller trails closer to home. I told myself I was just staying active, but really I was searching. Every sound made me pause, the crack of a branch, the hush of wind threading through the pines. I thought maybe I'd feel safer somewhere familiar, but the woods have a way of reminding you that familiarity is an illusion. The same trail can look different every day, and that's not a trick of the light. It's because the forest never stops moving. Roots rise, branches fall, paths fade. Nothing in nature stands still long enough to promise you safety. The first time I camped alone after it happened, I made a small fire by a lake. It was late. Too late for a man still haunted by what he'd seen. But I needed to do it. I needed to face whatever had rooted itself inside me since that night. I sat there, staring into the flames, listening to the dark, and I swear somewhere out there across the water I heard it again, that faint, methodical thud of wood against wood. But instead of fear, something else settled in me this time. Understanding. Whatever existed out there, whatever ancient rhythm had taken him, it wasn't chaos. It was purpose. The forest wasn't cruel. It was exacting. It takes only what belongs to it, and it never forgets. I started thinking about how we treat the wild, how we cut, burn, and wander through it like it's ours. We say we go camping to find peace, but what we really mean is that we want control. We want to play survivor with the promise of a hot shower waiting somewhere down the road. We bring gadgets, playlists, backup power banks, things to keep the silence at bay. But out there, where the air grows still and the earth swallows your tracks, there's no pretending. The forest sees what's left of you when all the noise is gone. Maybe that's why he went so willingly. Maybe he saw something pure in that darkness, something he thought could make him whole again. For a long time, I couldn't talk about him without feeling that cold weight settle in my chest. But as the years passed, the fear turned into something else. Respect. Reverence, maybe. Because if the forest wanted to teach us something that weekend, it did. It showed us that survival isn't about strength or skill or courage. It's about awareness, about humility, about knowing that you are not the main story in that place. You are a visitor, a whisper passing through something ancient. And if you don't listen, you won't last long enough to understand what it's trying to say. Every fall, I return to the edge of those woods. I never go far. I bring a small lantern, set it by the tree line, and light a single piece of dry wood before I leave. It's not a ritual, it's a reminder, a way of saying, I remember. I still hear you. Some people visit graves. I visit the silence that took my friend because I know that somewhere in that stillness, his work continues. The last firewood collector, still shaping the forest one log at a time, still finishing something none of us could understand. What I've come to realize is that fear isn't the enemy. Fear is the guide. It's the voice that tells you when you've gone too far, when you've forgotten where you are. It's not there to break you. It's there to keep you from becoming careless. In the wilderness, Every step is a conversation. Every sound has a meaning. And if you're lucky enough to walk out of it, you owe it your attention. You owe it your respect. Sometimes when I sit by a fire now, I find myself studying the flames the way I used to study faces. Each spark feels like a breath from something older than language. It's easy to romanticize survival, to tell stories about courage and discovery, but the truth is simpler and harder. It's about presence. The forest doesn't need you to conquer it. It just needs you to understand that you belong to it, even when you're far from it. And maybe that's the lesson he left behind, that what disappears in the wild doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it just changes form. Sometimes it becomes the whisper in the trees, the echo that keeps you looking over your shoulder, the feeling that something is walking beside you even when you're alone. That's not horror. That's memory. That's the forest remembering its own. When people ask why I still go camping after what happened, I tell them this: because I need to. Because that place still teaches me. Because the woods, in their terrible honesty, remind me what it means to be alive. Out there, stripped of everything, you're just a body breathing in the dark. You learn to listen again. You learn that peace and terror often share the same silence. And you learn that every fire you build, no matter how small, is a promise to endure, to respect, to return. So if you ever find yourself in those woods, somewhere north where the old logging trails fade into moss and mist, and you stumble upon a ring of perfect firewood stacks glinting with dew, don't disturb them. Don't take anything. Don't even step inside the circle. Just bow your head, thank the forest for letting you see what few ever do, and move on. Because somewhere close by where the shadows stay a little darker than they should, he's still working, still gathering, still keeping the fire alive for those who remember. And that's how you survive the deep woods. Not by conquering them, but by listening to them, by letting fear remind you that you're part of something older, vaster, and infinitely more patient than you'll ever be. Out there, under that endless canopy, we're all collectors in our own way. Each of us gathering pieces of the wild, one heartbeat at a time, and leaving behind the fingerprints that prove we were ever here at all. The woods don't end when you leave them. They follow you. In the smell of rain on pavement, in the way certain nights go too quiet for no reason at all. Sometimes I'll wake at home, thousands of miles from that ridge, and swear I can still feel the damp air pressing against my skin. The pulse of the earth, steady and ancient, like it's breathing beneath me. That's what the forest does when it marks you. It doesn't haunt you with monsters. It teaches you to notice what everyone else has forgotten. Most people live their lives surrounded by light, never realizing how small that circle really is. They walk through noise and motion, mistaking distraction for safety. But when you've been out there long enough, when you've seen how fast the dark can swallow a campfire, you start to understand that light isn't what saves you. It's what reminds you that you're still here. Every flame we build, every spark we coax out of wet wood is an act of defiance against forgetting. And maybe that's what he was doing. Maybe the last firewood collector wasn't taken at all. Maybe he became part of the rhythm that keeps the wilderness alive. I think about that sometimes, about how each of us leaves something behind in the places we love. A footprint, a broken branch, a moment of fear, a heartbeat. And maybe the forest keeps those pieces, builds them into its memory, the same way it builds rings inside a tree. Layer by layer, story by story. The man who vanished became one of those rings, and so did we. The moment we saw that circle of logs, we stopped being visitors. We became part of its story. When I tell people this story, they always ask what I believe happened to him. I never give them a clear answer. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter. What matters is what it left behind. The silence, the awareness, the understanding that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to be carried, like a small ember in your chest, glowing quietly to remind you that you once stood in the presence of something vast, something that doesn't need your explanation to exist. If there's one thing I wish everyone who camps, hikes, or wanders through those endless green cathedrals would understand, it's this. The wilderness is not waiting to hurt you, but it will humble you. It will strip away the illusion that you're in control. It will show you your edges, your weaknesses, your limits, and then if you're patient, it will show you peace. But that peace comes with a cost. You have to listen. You have to respect what you can't name. That's the real lesson I learned from him. Respect. Not fear of what's out there, but respect for it. For the quiet, for the distance between trees, for the rules that existed long before we did. Because when we forget that, when we treat the wild like a playground or a photo backdrop, something ancient takes notice. It reminds us that we're guests. It reminds us how quickly the forest can reclaim what's been borrowed. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm sitting alone by a campfire, I still whisper a few words to the darkness beyond the flame. Not a prayer, exactly. More like a promise. I tell the forest I'm still learning, that I haven't forgotten, that I'm still collecting. Not firewood, but moments. The sound of wind moving through the branches, the weight of silence before dawn, the heartbeat that returns when the world finally goes still. And I like to think he's out there, somewhere beyond the ridge, hearing it too. Maybe he's still cutting, still stacking, still leaving behind those perfect circles to remind us of the order we keep disturbing. Maybe his work isn't punishment. Maybe it's devotion. Maybe that's what the forest asks of all of us. To leave behind something honest, something real, even if it's just a single fingerprint in the dust. So when you go camping, remember him. Remember the man who walked into the woods and never came back, but left behind a lesson carved into the silence. Keep your fires small, your voices low, and your heart open to the things you can't explain. Listen when the forest speaks, because it will, if you let it. And if one night the wind dies and you hear the sound of wood splitting in the distance, don't be afraid. Just sit a little closer to the fire. That sound isn't there to scare you. It's there to remind you that you're alive, that you're part of the same rhythm he heard, that you're another collector, gathering your moments, stacking them carefully against the cold, one breath at a time. And when dawn comes and the fire burns down to ash, you'll understand what he must have known before he vanished, that every spark, every heartbeat, every step into the wilderness is part of a single promise between us and the earth. We borrow its beauty for a while. We carry its silence inside us, and when we're gone, the forest remembers. It always remembers. I've always been drawn to the kind of stories that people whisper around campfires, folklore that clings to geography like fog. The legend of the backward-flowing river had been circling around a few hiking forums I follow for years, dismissed by most as exaggeration or camera tricks. But there was one post, dated 2 years ago, that struck me differently. The poster wrote that he'd been up there himself, seen the river pause, and then watched the current reverse for 9 full minutes as if time itself had turned inside out. He never logged in again after that post. That was enough for me. We were 4 in total. Me, Marissa, who'd been my friend since college, Luke, the quiet type with a background in geology, and Aaron, who'd been running a wilderness photography channel online. We met up in the foothills of the Appalachians in early September when the air turned crisp enough to make you feel alive. But the nights hadn't yet gone cruel. I drove most of the way up in my old Subaru, loaded with tents, food, and enough camera gear to document anything we might witness. We planned to camp for 3 nights along the Ranshaw River, a narrow, fast-moving body that snaked between 2 ridges before vanishing into the trees. It wasn't on any modern tourist map. In fact, the coordinates I'd found had been shared by hikers who like to keep off-grid locations secret from mainstream campers. The trailhead itself was barely marked, just a bent steel sign with faded letters reading Old Logging Road, 1932. We parked the cars there and began hiking by noon. The forest swallowed the last bit of civilization within minutes. Pines rose close and tall, their tips brushing against the gray clouds rolling in from the west. Every few minutes, the wind carried the smell of cold water and decaying wood, clean but ancient, as though untouched since the first thaw. Luke led the way with the GPS, his head always tilted down. Marissa hummed as she walked, trying to cut the silence that made the place feel heavier than it should have. Aaron stopped often to take pictures, moss glowing electric green under the shade, fungus growing in the perfect curl of an old log, spider webs trembling with dew. She said this place had personality, though I couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment. It took us 4 hours to reach the river. The rancho didn't look remarkable at first glance. Maybe 12 feet wide, fast-moving, clear as glass. Pebbles shimmered beneath the surface, constantly shifting in the current. But standing on the bank, I could feel something uncanny, a sense that the water wasn't just flowing, but moving with intent. Every now and then, the light seemed to bend strangely on the surface, as if there were a subtle drag on time itself. "This is it," Luke said, checking the coordinates again. "Right where it's supposed to happen. The post said the reversal starts about 7 minutes after sunset." Marissa crouched by the water, trailing her fingers near the edge. "It's freezing." "Mountain runoff," Luke said. "Pure glacial feed." Erin set down her pack. "We'll set up camp about 50 yards back. That way we can frame the whole stretch for the time-lapse." We cleared a small area among the trees, just far enough from the river to avoid the damp chill, but close enough to hear its steady murmur. As the tents went up, I caught myself glancing at the current again and again. Something about the rhythm was hypnotic. If I stared long enough, it almost seemed to pulse, slowing, then racing again, as if sinking to a heartbeat I couldn't hear. By the time we finished camp, dusk had begun to fall. The forest around us went from a vibrant green to deep navy shadows. Crickets started their chorus. A breeze came off the water sharp enough to sting. Erin positioned her tripod at the bank's edge. The camera aimed straight across to the opposite shore where ferns grew thick. She double-checked the time on her phone. "Sunset at 7:43. Reversal at 7:50, she said. "That's the window." We all gathered near her, each holding our breath in quiet anticipation. The river was still moving normally, west to east, downhill toward the valley. The sound of it was soft but constant, a living thing threading through the silence. 7:45, 7:49. The forest seemed to still, as though waiting with us. At exactly 7:50, something shifted. I don't mean it looked like the river reversed. It actually did. The current slowed, then stopped altogether for a few seconds. Pebbles beneath the surface stilled. The sound of rushing water faded to near silence. Then slowly the current began to move backward, climbing upstream against the gradient. The sight defied reason. It was as if gravity itself had lost interest in this one piece of earth. "Holy hell," Marissa whispered. Luke's mouth hung open. That's physically impossible. You'd need a backflow vacuum or some kind of pressure differential. This shouldn't happen." But it was happening. For 9 minutes, we watched the water creep uphill like liquid glass in a dream. Erin's camera clicked in long exposure bursts. None of us spoke again until the current resumed its natural course, sweeping eastward once more as if nothing had occurred. 9 minutes. Exactly. We all looked at one another, waiting for someone to explain it away, but no one could. Later that night, we sat by the campfire in uneasy silence. The glow threw long shadows over the trees, and the crackle of sap popping sounded like distant footsteps. Marissa poured herself a bit of whiskey and passed the bottle around. "So we actually saw it," she said. "Like, really saw it." Erin nodded, staring into the firelight. "I got everything. Every second. Tomorrow we'll check the footage." Luke exhaled, rubbing his temples. "The mountains got geothermal channels. Maybe there's a periodic pressure reversal underground, or magnetic interference. I don't know, but there's a pattern." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the river in the distance, its flow steady again. But underneath that sound, there was something else, an echoing hum, almost imperceptible, like the reverberation of a deep note. I told myself it was the wind. When we finally crawled into our tents, the forest had gone utterly still. Not silent, still, the kind of quiet where even your heartbeat feels intrusive. I lay awake listening, trying to convince myself the river's rhythm was steady again, that the world hadn't hiccuped. Then, around midnight, I heard it. The faint splash of footsteps in shallow water. One, two, then another. They were coming from the river. I froze. The sound moved against the current, steady and deliberate. For a brief moment, I thought maybe Luke or Marissa had gotten up to pee. But when I turned my head, I could see the vague outlines of their tents, both zipped shut, unmoving. The footsteps continued, faint but rhythmic, until they faded upstream. I didn't move for the rest of the night. Morning came late, or maybe it just felt that way. The trees were so dense around our camp that sunlight barely filtered through the canopy. When I crawled out of my tent, the air was heavy with mist that clung low to the ground, moving as if stirred by something invisible beneath it. The river sounded normal again, rushing downhill, the same as before, but there was an odd echo in the sound, a faint duplication, like hearing a recording played back half a second late. Marissa was already up, hunched over the fire pit, trying to coax flames from damp kindling. Her face looked pale, tired. "You didn't sleep either?" I asked. She shook her head. "You heard it too, didn't you?" I hesitated. "The footsteps." Her eyes snapped up to meet mine. "Yeah, I thought I was imagining it." Luke emerged next, rubbing his face, looking like hell. He muttered something about the cold and grabbed his thermos. Erin followed a few minutes later, carrying her camera like a newborn. "I checked the footage," she said flatly. "You guys need to see this." We gathered around her as she set up her laptop on a dry patch of ground. The video opened to the shot of the river from last night. At first, it looked just like we remembered. The water flowing normally, then pausing, then reversing. The current shimmered in the dusk light, smooth and glassy. But as the reversal reached its peak, Erin slowed the playback. "Watch the far bank," she said. At first I saw nothing, just shadow, mist, and the faint ripple of current moving backward. But then out of the fog, shapes began to form. Dark figures waist-deep in the water, walking upstream. They were faint, almost transparent, but moving with steady, unnatural grace. There were at least 6 of them, their heads tilted slightly downward, their movements synchronized. None made a splash. None cast a reflection. Marissa whispered, "Oh my God." "They weren't there when we were watching," Luke said, voice shaking slightly. "I swear they weren't." "They must have been behind the fog," Erin said, her tone half defensive, half in disbelief. "But the camera picked them up clear as day. Look." She zoomed in, and for a split second, one of the figures turned its head. Its face, or what should have been a face, was nothing but a smooth void. I felt my throat tighten. "When did the footage stop?" "Exactly when the current went back to normal," Erin said. "Then they just faded." Luke leaned closer to the screen, pausing the frame on that faceless head. "Could be a visual anomaly," he muttered. "Light refraction, the mist acting as a mirror." "No reflection makes something move," Marissa said. We argued in low, uneasy tones for a while until the conversation died the way firewood turns to ash, softly and inevitably. By noon, we decided to hike upriver to see where the current originated. The legend online had mentioned something about the bend where the trees grow backward. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but Luke marked a location on his GPS that matched the general description. We packed lightly, leaving most of our supplies at camp. The trail along the river narrowed fast, twisting between rocks slick with moss. The sound of water echoed off the walls of the canyon, just distorting direction, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes everywhere at once. The mist grew thicker the further we went, until it looked like the river itself was breathing. About a mile upriver, the forest floor changed. The soil grew soft, almost spongy, and the trees began to lean, not forward toward the light, but backward, their trunks curving as though something deep in the ground was pulling them upstream. Roots twisted out of the soil like veins. "This is it," Luke said quietly. The bend. The river split briefly into a wide pool before narrowing again into rapids. The water there had a strange shimmer, as if reflecting two different skies, the one above us and another darker one beneath. I crouched near the bank, feeling that same eerie hum through my fingertips. It wasn't vibration exactly. It was something subtler, like the resonance of a voice just below hearing range. Erin took photos in rapid succession. "It's like the ground's magnetic," she said. "The compass keeps spinning." "Mine too," Luke muttered, frowning at his gear. "Something screwing with the magnetite." Marissa stood a few paces back, her eyes fixed on the pool. "You guys see that?" I followed her gaze. On the far side of the water, just beneath the surface, shapes seemed to waver, long, thin silhouettes, distorted like shadows under glass. They weren't fish. They were too tall, too human. The air turned cold enough to make my teeth ache. I backed away from the edge. "We should go." Erin snapped another picture, her finger trembling slightly on the shutter. "Wait, one more." The sound that came out of the water silenced us all. It was like an exhale, a deep collective sigh, not from one thing but from many. The surface of the pool rippled inward as though something vast beneath it was drawing breath. Then silence again. Luke stepped forward. "Okay," he said tightly. "We're heading back. Now." We retraced our steps down the trail. The mist followed us this time, clinging to our backs. Every now and then, I caught the faint sound of water sloshing in rhythm with our footsteps, but out of sync, like something copying us from the river. When we finally made it back to camp, the sun had already dipped low. The river was calm again, flowing naturally, but the light had that strange copper tone that always seemed to appear before sunset here. Erin sat by the fire, scrolling through her camera. "All my shots from the bend," she said, voice shaking. "They're gone." "What do you mean gone?" I asked. She turned the screen toward us. Every frame from the last hour was pure white static. "The files are there," she said, "but the images are nothing but overexposure." Luke rubbed his arms. "Some electromagnetic anomaly. That place is like a magnet storm." Marissa didn't answer. She was staring at the river again. The sun had just hit the horizon. 7:40, she said quietly. We all looked up. The current slowed, the forest hushed. Then, as before, the river reversed. But this time there was something different. The water didn't just move backward. It rose. Small waves lapped at the banks as though something beneath was pushing upward. The air felt electric, charged with static. Erin grabbed her camera, fumbling with trembling hands. Then, from upriver, the faint sound of footsteps began again. Splash! Splash! Moving closer this time, closer than last night. Luke whispered, "Tell me someone else hears that." We all did. And then, through the mist, figures emerged. 6, maybe 7, walking silently upstream. They glowed faintly against the twilight, outlines blurring where the light touched them. None had faces, none made sound. They just kept walking, unbothered by the reversed current. Marissa stepped back. "What do they want?" The figures stopped abruptly, as if hearing her. The nearest one tilted its head toward us. The sound of the river deepened, a low thrumming that vibrated in my ribs. Then every flame in our campfire went out at once. We stood there in the sudden darkness, hearts hammering, breath held. When my eyes adjusted, the figures were gone. The river was flowing forward again. Only then did I realize the hum hadn't stopped. It had only moved closer. The hum was inside the ground now. I could feel it rising through my boots like a pulse. It wasn't sound anymore. It was pressure, vibration, a low resonance that blurred thought and made my teeth ache. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't feel like mine. The mist around the river thickened until the trees vanished completely. Marissa gripped my arm. "Do you hear that?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. Erin's camera was still in her hands, lens fogged, the power light flickering on and off as though reacting to the same rhythm we felt under our feet. Luke moved toward the fire pit, knelt down, and tried to relight it. His hands were shaking. Every time he struck the lighter, the flame bent away from the spark, like the air itself was being pulled toward the river. Then the ground sighed again. The current behind us hissed as though disturbed by something massive. I turned toward the sound just in time to see the mist part for a second. Something tall and colorless stood in the shallows. half in the river, half out. It wasn't human, but it had the shape of one, its body flickering like a reflection that shouldn't exist. It stepped backward into the flow and was gone. Luke stumbled away from the riverbank, pale as ash. "We're done. We're packing up right now." No one argued. We grabbed whatever gear we could carry in the dark. The tents were still half standing, ropes shivering as if caught in an invisible wind. The forest seemed to lean inward while we moved, the trees bending, the shadows between them thickening into solid black. We started up the trail toward the cars. The GPS refused to load. The compass needles spun. The air grew thicker the further we went, as if walking into a pocket of static. Aaron whispered something, prayer or panic, I couldn't tell. But the moment the word left her mouth, a whisper answered it from the trees. It was her own voice, repeating the same phrase in the same cadence, a few seconds delayed. She froze. "Did you?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Keep walking." But then the echo came again, closer this time. The exact tone, same breath, same tremor. It wasn't bouncing off the canyon walls, it was moving with us. Luke swung his flashlight toward the sound, the beam cutting through fog so thick it looked like smoke. The light fell on a tree trunk, wet with condensation, and something carved into the bark. Letters, shallow, uneven, but fresh. "We came to watch." Aaron gasped. "That wasn't there before," Marissa said. I couldn't answer. I didn't have to. I remembered the forum post, the one that mentioned the reversal lasting 9 minutes. The hiker had ended his story with one line. "Don't be there when it stops. We hadn't left soon enough." The trail ahead split unexpectedly, branching into two paths that shouldn't have existed. We stopped at the fork, arguing in whispers. Luke insisted the left led downhill toward the cars. Marissa swore it was the right. Erin started crying softly, saying she couldn't remember the way anymore, that the forest was rearranging itself. I tried to breathe. The air was sour, metallic. The hum was louder again, so loud it felt like the sound was under my skin. "We need to pick one," I said, "now." Luke chose left. We followed him. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly. The mist swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Every now and then I thought I saw movement in the fog beside us. Figures pacing in silence, matching our stride. Each time I turned my head, there was nothing there. Then Erin tripped. Her camera clattered onto the rocks. When I bent to pick it up, I saw the lens flicker, the power light blinking on by itself. The screen came alive, footage rolling from moments ago but in reverse. We were moving backward, retracing our steps in fast, jerky motion. Then, between the frames, I saw something that hadn't happened. A pale shape walking just behind us, its limbs dragged through the air as if the atmosphere were water. The screen went black. Erin started screaming. "Run!" Luke shouted. We didn't need convincing. We ran, branches clawing at our clothes, the mist tearing apart around our bodies like smoke. I could hear water again, but it was all wrong. The sound of rushing surging uphill. The river was near, even though we'd been hiking away from it. We broke through the trees into another clearing, panting, confused. The moon had risen, distorted by fog, its reflection trembling on the surface of water. We were back at the river. Same bend, same bank. Somewhere behind us, the woods exhaled, a long, low moan that could have been wind or something older. Luke cursed. We went in a circle. Marissa backed away from the water. "No, the trail. There's no way." But the trees around us were unmistakable. Their trunks leaned upstream, roots twisted like claws. The current was sluggish again. 7:49. I checked my watch without meaning to. The second hand trembled. "Don't look at it," Erin said suddenly, clutching her ears. "Don't look at the water." Luke frowned. "Why?" "Because they're in it." We turned anyway. The surface of the river rippled once, twice, then calmed. Then, in perfect silence, the current stopped again. Pebbles shimmered under the glassy surface. The hum reached a pitch so deep it made the air vibrate. And from beneath that stillness, dozens of hands broke the surface. Gray, waterlogged, fingers splayed wide. Not reaching for us exactly, but searching, dragging across the stones like blind things remembering touch. Erin dropped her camera and fell to her knees, whispering, "It's recording us now." Luke grabbed her, pulling her back as one of the hands twitched toward shore. The river's direction changed, flowing backward again, faster this time, water surging uphill, dragging debris, sticks, and stones with it. And with that backward rush came the figures. Not 6 anymore, dozens. They emerged from the river like mist taking shape, walking upstream, their faces blank, their bodies transparent except for the eyes, which gleamed faintly as they passed. Not eyes exactly. Reflections. Ours. Each one carried a faint echo of light where a face should be, and in that light I saw myself, an inverted image, walking calmly through a river that shouldn't exist, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Marissa began sobbing. "They're us!" Luke stumbled backward, tripping over a rock. No, that's impossible." The nearest figure stopped at the bank, tilting its head the way the one last night had. Water streamed from its hands, but its mouth, its reflection mouth, moved slowly, shaping syllables that didn't match the motion of the river. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel the sound in my bones. 9 minutes. That's all it would last. Then what? Behind us, the forest seemed to close. Mist rising, branches bending inward, the air thick with something that wasn't fog anymore, but memory. Old, stale, recycled memory replaying itself. I could smell the metallic tang of wet stone and something else beneath it. Decay. The figure stepped closer. It opened its mouth wider. Inside was water, flowing the wrong way, and then the current began pulling us. The soil gave beneath our feet, sucking at our boots, dragging us toward the bank. Erin screamed as her tripod tumbled into the river and vanished under the churn. Luke tried to grab her, but the mud slid away under him. "Hold on," I shouted, reaching for a root jutting out of the ground. My fingers found purchase just as my lower body hit the icy water. The cold was unreal, like stepping into airless space. The current pulled at me, upward against the mountain, dragging everything in the wrong direction. The figures turned in unison, all moving upstream into the darkness. And then, somewhere in the chaos, I realized I could hear them now, not just the hum, but voices beneath it. Dozens of whispers layered together, saying the same thing in endless repetition. We watched once. Now we're watched forever. The current surged again, slamming me against the bank. I don't remember how we got out. I just remember crawling through the mud, gasping, the river already calming behind us as if nothing had happened. The reversal had ended, and we were still here. For now. The air after the reversal felt wrong. Hollow. Like the sound had been scooped out of the forest, leaving only the echo of what silence should feel like. The river trickled again, obediently downhill, but the rhythm wasn't right. It pulsed in uneven intervals like something breathing through water. We collapsed on the muddy bank, drenched and trembling. Marissa was the first to break the stillness, her voice barely above a whisper. "It let us go." "No," Luke said, spitting mud. It lost interest. Erin sat a few feet away, hugging her knees. Her camera bag was gone, dragged into the river with the rest of the gear. She stared blankly at the water, lips moving without sound. When I leaned closer, I realized she was counting over and over again from 1 to 9. 9 minutes. I checked my watch again. The second hand was twitching in tiny, uneven movements caught between ticks. Frozen time. I wanted to tell them we should keep moving, that we had to find a way down before sunset returned. But every time I tried to stand, the world tilted slightly off-center, like the trees were leaning toward me. The forest was alive with a pressure that felt like waiting. We stumbled back into the trail, following the faint remnants of our footprints, or what I thought were our footprints. Some looked reversed, the heel marks facing the wrong direction. Others were deeper, as though someone heavier had stepped exactly where we had. I tried not to look at them too long. As we walked, Erin muttered under her breath, counting again. I touched her shoulder. "Hey, stay with me." She blinked at me like she was waking from a dream. "It's not over. You know that, right?" "What?" "It only looks forward during the day." Her voice quivered. "At night, it looks back." We reached the clearing where our cars were supposed to be, but they weren't. Just an empty gravel lot, scattered pine needles, and tire impressions filled with muddy water. No vehicles. No sign we'd ever arrived. My chest tightened. Luke walked in circles, checking the coordinates on his GPS again and again. This is the same damn spot. It has to be. Marissa pressed her hand to her mouth. Then where? Before she could finish, the wind picked up. Not the kind that rustles leaves, but one that moves like breath, slow, deliberate, brushing the back of your neck as if testing your temperature. The trees around us swayed in one synchronized motion, and through the wind, faint but distinct, came the sound of water uphill. I turned toward the river. It was still flowing backward. Even in daylight, the others saw it too. The reversal had never stopped. It was just slower now, deliberate, crawling like honey against gravity. The surface shimmered with a metallic reflection, like the whole river had become a mirror. Erin took a step toward it, dazed. "It's showing us," she murmured. "Look." I followed her gaze. In the mirrored current, our reflections stood perfectly still, not rippling, not distorted, motionless images of ourselves, frozen mid-step. Then, slowly, the reflections began to move independently. They turned toward one another, whispering words that didn't sync with our own lips. I felt the pressure again, the hum climbing up my spine. I couldn't breathe. Luke shouted, "Stop looking at it!" But his voice sounded muffled, as if underwater. Marissa fell to her knees, pressing her hands over her ears. The reflections kept talking, mouths opening wider, their faces twisting into versions of us that didn't belong to our timeline. Older, gaunter, eyes black with water. One raised a finger, pointing directly at me. Then the entire river convulsed. A surge of black water erupted from its surface like a living wall. It crashed against the opposite bank, sending spray into the trees. Beneath the roar, I could hear screaming, not loud, but layered far away, like a memory of people drowning. We stumbled backward. The moment I broke eye contact with the water, the screaming stopped. The current eased. The reflection of myself lingered a second longer, then faded. Luke was panting. "We need to get off this mountain. I don't care if it takes all night." We didn't argue this time. The trail sloped north toward higher ground, but Luke said it connected to an old service road that might lead back to the main highway. We moved fast, no brakes, no words. Every few minutes I caught a faint shimmer between the trees, like water moving through air, but there were no streams nearby. After about an hour, the forest began to thin. The mist followed us, snaking through the pines like veins. I could see patches of sky, bruised purple and orange with the onset of dusk. My legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. That's when Erin stopped walking. She was staring at a tree to our left, her face pale. That's my jacket." I looked closer. Hanging from a low branch was a red waterproof jacket, her jacket. Same tier at the shoulder, same silver zipper. It was damp, dripping river water. "That's impossible," I said. "You were wearing it when we left camp." Her voice cracked. "No, I took it off at the bend to film. But that was..." She didn't finish. Luke yanked it down and threw it aside. "We keep moving." But as it hit the ground, something fell out of the pocket. Her memory card case. It was dry. Erin's hands shook as she picked it up. "If this has the footage, if this proves it happened..." "Forget the proof," I snapped. "Just move." She didn't listen. She opened the case, pulled out one of the cards, and shoved it into her camera. The screen flickered, then came to life. The video showed the four of us at camp just before sunset. The fire, the tents, us laughing nervously. But the timestamp was wrong. It read September 14th, 2018, 2 years before today. "Erin," I said quietly, "that can't be right." The footage kept playing. We were all there, but something was off. Our faces looked thinner, our eyes darker, as if we'd been awake for days. Then, in the background, the river began to move backward. The versions of us on screen didn't react. They just kept sitting there, motionless, like waiting statues. Erin dropped the camera. The screen cracked. "That's not us," she whispered. "That's not from tonight." Luke grabbed her arm. "We're leaving now." We ran again. I don't know how long. My lungs burned, my legs shook. The forest darkened quickly, swallowing the last streaks of sunlight. The hum followed us, vibrating through the air like a hidden frequency only we could feel. Eventually, the trail widened into a gravel road. Relief hit like a wave. The air here felt cleaner, thinner. I could see stars through the break in the canopy. For the first time, I thought we might actually make it out. Then Marissa stopped dead. "Listen," she said. I did. At first, I thought it was wind, but then I recognized the rhythm, the soft, deliberate splash of footsteps in shallow water, coming from somewhere up ahead, moving toward us. I swung my flashlight forward. The beam caught something glistening across the road, a narrow stream cutting through the gravel, no wider than a few feet. But the water was flowing the wrong way, uphill, toward the ridge, and in that thin, impossible stream, silhouettes were moving, wading upstream, just like before. One by one, they turned their faces toward us. They were closer than ever. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my chest started to burn. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand, shaking across the narrow strip of reversed water cutting through the gravel road. The figures in that stream weren't walking anymore. They were standing, just beneath the surface, as though the current itself was holding them upright. The light glinted off the dark water, showing only partial outlines. Shoulders, jaws, and the faint shimmer of eyes that weren't reflecting anything. Luke whispered, "They can't cross land. They're bound to the river." But even as he said it, the first one took a step forward. The sound it made wasn't a splash, it was a slurp, like mud trying to breathe. The shape dragged itself half out of the water, leaving a trail of wet silt behind, the darkness from the river staining the gravel beneath its feet. Marissa gasped and stumbled backward. "Oh God, what is that?" "Run," I said, though my voice came out as a whisper. We turned and sprinted down the road, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots echoing into the woods. Behind us, I could hear more of those wet, dragging steps, slow, steady, patient. They didn't run. They didn't need to. It felt like the distance between us and them didn't matter. The sound stayed the same, always right behind us. The mist moved with us, rolling down the road like fog pulled by invisible strings. The moon above was wrong, bloated and red, shimmering as if seen through water. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out. We ran blind for what felt like hours. At some point, Erin fell behind. I didn't notice until her scream tore through the dark. I turned around, but all I could see was the pale shimmer of mist closing in around her shape. Luke tried to go back, but I grabbed him. "No!" I shouted. "You can't help her!" The scream cut off mid-breath. The forest swallowed the sound whole. We kept running. The road began to slope downhill again, winding into a narrow canyon. I could hear water nearby, not the thin stream from before, but a full river, roaring and alive. Luke looked back once, his face gray with exhaustion. "If that's Ranshaw, we can follow it down to the valley." But my gut twisted. "The river's not right, Luke." He didn't answer. We stumbled into another clearing moments later, the trees opening to reveal a wide channel of black water cutting through rock. The moonlight shimmered across its surface, and for a second I felt dizzy. The current was flowing uphill again. Not fast, not violent, just steady and deliberate, like a slow heartbeat that didn't belong to the earth. We didn't speak. The hum was back, vibrating through the air, low and constant. The rocks around the river were slick with condensation, as if breathing. Marissa dropped to her knees, sobbing quietly. "It won't let us go," she whispered. "We've been walking in circles. I think we've been walking through it." Luke stared into the water, his flashlight trembling. "There's something under there. Look." I forced myself to look. Beneath the surface, silhouettes moved, faint and fluid, as if drifting in a slow current. They looked like people sleeping underwater, eyes closed, arms folded across their chests, hundreds of them layered at different depths. And then one opened its eyes. Its face, my face, looked up at me from below. I stumbled backward, slipping on wet rock. My reflection blinked, but I hadn't. My reflection smiled. "Don't look at it," Marissa screamed. "It's copying you." Luke backed up, his breathing fast and shallow. "They're not reflections, they're recordings. Trapped loops. Every reversal, it adds another layer." I couldn't think. I could barely breathe. Then Erin's voice came from behind us. Soft, calm, wrong. "You left me." We turned. She was standing at the tree line, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. Her eyes were wide and glassy, glowing faintly with that same dull shimmer as the river. Her skin looked stretched, translucent, veins blackened beneath it. Marissa took a step forward. "Erin?" "Don't," I whispered. Erin tilted her head, water dripping from her mouth. "It doesn't stop," she said, her voice layered, hers and something beneath it whispering in perfect synchronization. "It keeps pulling you back until you learn how to watch." Luke raised his flashlight toward her, and the beam passed through part of her body. Her edges blurred like steam. "You're not her," he said. "Erin, or what was left of her," smiled faintly. "Neither are you anymore." Then she stepped backward into the mist, and the forest swallowed her whole. The hum swelled to a deafening pitch. The river churned. Water climbed the banks like living smoke, sliding across the rocks toward us. "Go!" Luke yelled. We ran again, back toward the slope away from the current. But the mist was thicker now, curling between our legs, damp and heavy as if it wanted to root us in place. My boots hit mud that didn't feel like soil anymore. It pulsed beneath me, alive with that impossible rhythm. Up ahead, through the fog, a faint orange glow shimmered. I thought for one insane moment that it was sunrise. But as we got closer, I realized what it was, our campfire. Still burning, still alive. That wasn't possible. We approached cautiously. The fire crackled the same way it had that first night, throwing long shadows across the trees. Our tents were there too, untouched, dry. My mind couldn't reconcile it. Had we really gone anywhere? Marissa clutched my arm. "This isn't real. We left this. We left this." Luke walked up to the fire pit, staring down at it. The flames reflected in his eyes like molten glass. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we never left. The air went cold again. Behind us, the sound of water was rising, the backward current roaring louder, climbing toward the clearing. The firelight flickered as if reacting to the sound, shrinking with each pulse. Marissa was crying now. "Please, can we just go home?" I was about to answer when I saw movement beyond the fire. Across the clearing, half concealed by smoke, stood the same figures from the river, not translucent anymore, solid, gray, dripping with dark water. They stood in a perfect line, each one identical, and at the front was a new one, its shape familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. It was me. I was looking at myself. Same clothes, same mud stains, same expression, frozen in terror. My double took a step forward, head tilted, eyes black as wet stone. When it opened its mouth, a low sound came out. Not words, just the vibration of the river's hum-given voice. The air warped around it. The fire bent toward it. Luke tried to move, but his feet wouldn't. He was stuck in the same pulsing mud as me. The ground itself was dragging us closer to the fire, toward those shapes that waited just beyond it. I saw my reflection raise a hand. The gesture was slow, deliberate, as though inviting me closer. Marissa screamed and bolted for the trees. The instant she crossed the clearing's edge, she vanished. Not into darkness, but into light, as if swallowed by reflection. One blink and she was gone. Luke shouted her name, but the sound came out backward like a tape in reverse. My reflection smiled again, and then everything went white. For a moment there was no river, no forest, no fire, just an infinite echo of rushing water inside my skull, moving in both directions at once. I felt myself falling, upward and downward, until I hit the ground hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. When I opened my eyes, it was morning again. The river flowed calmly east, sunlight breaking through the trees. The camp was gone. No tents, no fire, no tracks, just me. I stood on the bank, shivering, mud caked to my legs. My watch was cracked, the second hand frozen at 7:50, and in the water where my reflection should have been, there was nothing. Only the backward current, moving silently uphill. I turned away and began walking down the trail, not caring where it led. I didn't look back until I heard the sound of footsteps splashing behind me, steady and patient, matching my pace exactly. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, I saw my reflection walking upstream again, smiling, waiting, and the river was beginning to reverse. I don't remember when exhaustion overtook the fear. At some point, the horror just quieted, like my body had accepted it and everything else, The shaking, the disbelief, the screaming part of my brain just shut off to survive. The morning light should have brought clarity, but instead it felt artificial, like a set light aimed at the wrong stage. I kept walking, following what looked like the trail, but somehow wasn't. The trees leaned subtly upstream, every trunk angled the same way, as though bowing to something invisible above the river. I didn't even question it anymore. The water beside me still flowed backward. Not violently, not defying physics like a spectacle, but slow, patient, like the mountain itself had turned its blood in reverse. I knew I was being followed. Each time my boots hit the mud, I'd hear the echo half a second later, splash, splash, deliberate and measured, matching me exactly. I never saw anyone when I turned around, just the mist sliding between the trunks. After an hour, maybe more, I reached a ridge where the forest dropped into open sky. The valley below looked normal, dotted with evergreens and scattered light. I could almost believe I'd made it back to reality. But then I saw the river cutting through it, a silver vein coiling uphill. I fell to my knees. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I looked down again, I realized my reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. The surface below the ridge was clear enough to see myself perfectly, and it was moving, head turning slowly side to side, scanning the trees around me. Then it looked up, right at me. I scrambled backward, tripping on roots, but the image stayed, still watching. A voice spoke from behind me. "You shouldn't have stayed to watch." I froze. The tone was calm, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. When I turned, Luke stood there, or the shape of him. His clothes were soaked, skin pale and translucent. The sunlight didn't touch him right. It seemed to slide off like water refusing to wet him. "Luke?" I croaked. He smiled faintly, a slow, tired expression that wasn't quite human. "You thought you made it out, didn't you?" My throat locked up. "Where's Marissa?" "Aaron?" His eyes moved toward the river below us. "They're in the current. It keeps what it's shown. That's the rule." I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, filled with something colder than blood. "I don't understand. Why us?" He stepped closer. "Because you recorded it. Because you tried to prove it. The river doesn't want to be known. It wants to be remembered." His voice fractured on the last word, overlapping itself, echoing backward. "Luke?" He reached out a hand, dripping black water. "You'll understand soon. You already started to." When his fingers brushed my arm, I felt a pull, not physical, but internal, like something tugging my thoughts through a drain. My memories began to ripple. The hike, the laughter, the fire. They reversed in flashes, running backward through my head like a film rewinding too fast. I yanked away, stumbling downhill, gasping for air. The hum roared again. The river below began to shimmer, sunlight bending into impossible shapes. The backward current accelerated, climbing the valley wall, threading through the trees like veins of mercury. I ran, but the world was coming apart around me. The air heavy, the ground soft, time folding over itself in nauseating waves. Branches tore at my jacket as I tore through the forest, every breath sharp with cold. The sound of rushing water grew louder, closer, until I realized it wasn't behind me anymore. It was around me. The mist had thickened into walls of liquid air, moving both up and down at once. I was inside the river now, inside its memory. Shapes moved in the haze, figures I recognized, each of them versions of myself at different points in the trip. One laughing by the fire, one filming the reversal, one screaming at the bank. They all moved in opposite directions, crossing paths without touching. Their mouths were open, but no sound came out. I screamed, but my voice bent in half, coming back reversed, a wet, distorted echo of the same terror. Then I saw her. Marissa stood at the center of the haze, ankle deep in mirrored water, hair floating around her face like ink. Her expression was calm. Too calm. "It's okay," she said softly. "You can rest now. It doesn't hurt once you stop fighting it." "I'm not staying here," I said. "I'm not one of you. You already are." Behind her, hundreds of faces began surfacing from the current. Each one shimmered for a moment before fading back into the depths. All identical. All me. I stumbled backward, slipping on the wet ground. The hum rose again, splitting into words, Thousands of overlapping whispers saying one line in perfect synchrony. Watch it long enough and it watches back. The sky fractured. The mountains twisted into the reflection of themselves. I was falling again, pulled through layers of light and sound until everything went black. I woke to the sound of running water, normal water. The sun was out. Birds were calling. The air smelled clean again. I was sitting by the Ranshaw River. My clothes were dry. My backpack rested beside me, untouched. The world looked new, innocent, unscarred by anything unnatural. For a brief, trembling moment, I thought it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or altitude. I almost laughed. Then I saw the camera sitting by my foot. Aaron's camera. The lens was cracked, but the red light was on. Recording. My hands shook as I picked it up. The display flickered, then played a clip without me touching a thing. The footage showed me, right there by the water, sitting exactly as I was now, looking into the lens. I didn't remember recording it. The me on the screen spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. You shouldn't have stayed to watch. I dropped the camera. The sound of the river changed, subtle at first, then undeniable. The current slowed. Pebbles beneath the surface stilled. I stared as the water began to climb, reversing direction, flowing uphill once more, back toward the mountain. 9 minutes. That's all I had. And when the figures started to rise again from the reflection, I recognized the one leading them this time. It was Luke. Behind him, Aaron, Marissa, and just behind them, me. The camera's red light blinked twice, then stopped recording. Now, every night, the river reverses for 9 minutes, and it always begins the same way, with my reflection turning first. I keep telling myself I'll leave tomorrow, drive far from these mountains, forget this place entirely. But I don't think I can, because every dusk, when the hum begins deep beneath the stones, I find myself standing at the bank again, waiting, staring into the water as it begins to climb. And in the moment before it reverses, I see my reflection smile, as if welcoming me home. The night was so still that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my skull, and that silence, so thick, so absolute, was the reason I knew something was wrong long before I opened my eyes. My name is Aaron, 34 years old, raised in a small mountain town where people learned early that the woods have their own language. I grew up camping in the backcountry with my father, and later, alone. I trusted the forest because it had always been honest with me. I thought I knew its rhythms, its warnings, its small whispers carried in the wind. But the truth is, you never know the woods. You only know what they let you learn. That mistake, believing I had earned understanding, was the mistake that brought me to that night, on the shores of a forgotten lake near the Idaho-Montana border, where something breathed through the thin fabric of my tent and reminded me how small I truly was. I had set up my camp after a long day of hiking, somewhere between the timberline and a narrow valley filled with old-growth pines. Locals called it Owlwater Basin, though I never once heard an owl during my time there. What they did tell me, in half-muttered warnings and sidelong looks, was that the basin had strange acoustics, that sound traveled in ways that didn't make sense. Voices called back differently. Footsteps seemed closer or farther than they should be. Some even claimed that the forest there learned you the longer you stayed. I laughed it off then, bravado, arrogance, whatever you want to call it. But the truth is, sometimes we walk into danger because we think we're too experienced to be afraid. I pitched my tent on soft ground beneath a towering cedar, layered my sleeping bag, and cooked my dinner over a crackling fire that seemed too loud, like someone had adjusted the world's volume knob to full. Even the hiss of the water boiling was sharp, defined, as if I could see the shape of each sound cutting through the air. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridge, the forest grew even quieter. No insects, no wind, no distant rustling, just the heavy stillness of a place that had closed its eyes. It's strange how silence can feel like a warning. I brushed my teeth, packed away my gear, and crawled into my tent, feeling that familiar comfort of nylon walls around me. There is a kind of trust we put in thin fabric, as if canvas and zippers are enough to keep the night at bay. That trust would be tested before sunrise. I fell asleep quickly, exhaustion overpowering the unease, but sometime after midnight I woke to a sound that didn't belong. At first I thought it was me. My breath, my heartbeat, the small shifts of my body in the sleeping bag. But this sound was deeper, slower, heavier. A deliberate inhale, a long exhale, and it wasn't coming from outside the tent. The fabric itself was moving. I felt the walls expand gently at first, then more visibly, as if a large chest beneath the nylon were taking in air. My mind froze. I lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, watching as the tent swelled with each inhale and collapsed with the exhale. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. I stared at the ceiling inches above my face, waiting for it to stop, waiting for a sign that it was just wind I couldn't feel or some strange atmospheric pressure. But there was no wind. There was no breeze. The night outside was dead still, and that breathing, slow, rhythmic, deliberate, continued in a pattern too purposeful to be anything natural. I pressed my palm against the fabric. It was warm. Fear is a strange teacher. It doesn't speak in full sentences, only sharp instincts. Every part of me screamed to stay still, to remain silent, to pretend that whatever shared the tent with me didn't know I was awake. But another voice, smaller yet steadier, whispered that stillness was surrender. I needed to understand, to know whether it was animal, human, or something far more unsettling. With trembling fingers, I reached for the zipper. I could feel that warmth again, like exhaled breath against my skin. I inhaled slowly, and with a careful pull, I opened the tent. The zipper didn't make its usual sound. It slid quietly, too quietly, as though the night itself didn't want to acknowledge what I was doing. When I finally pulled the flap open, the air inside the tent whooshed out, warm and humid, brushing across my face like something had just finished breathing and fled. The darkness outside was cold, crisp, and utterly empty. I crawled halfway out and scanned the tree line. No shapes, no eyes, no movement, just towering shadows carved by moonlight. The tent sagged slightly behind me, normal, lifeless, ordinary once again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had interrupted something that had been inches away from me, something that had been studying me, matching my rhythm, waiting. I sat there with my knees in the dirt, staring into the trees and listening for anything, any sound, any clue. Nothing. The forest was silent in a way that didn't feel natural. Silence can be peaceful, but this silence was alive. It pushed against my skin, pressed into my ears, made me feel like I had stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time. I stayed awake for hours, watching, listening, waiting, but nothing else happened that night. When dawn finally broke, the first rays of sunlight felt like rescue. I packed my gear quickly, eager to leave the basin behind. But just before taking down the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach twist, a faint imprint on the inside wall. Not a handprint, not an animal paw. It looked like the outline of a mouth, stretched wide, pressed against the fabric from the inside. And beside it, slightly lower, the vague impression of a larger shape, something like a rib cage expanding outward. I stood there staring at that faint imprint as the morning light filtered through the thin nylon, revealing shapes that shouldn't have been there. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the angle, a distortion from the shadows or condensation. But the longer I looked, the more real it became. Those curved skeletal impressions, those stretched shapes that resembled lungs pressing outward. I ran my fingers over the material, and the fabric was still slightly warmer in that spot than the rest of the tent. Not hot, not fresh, just held warmth, like something with its own breath had been resting there for too long. I pulled my hand back and felt a chill needle straight through my spine. Maybe fear exaggerates things, or maybe fear sharpens clarity. I know now it was the latter. When you feel watched, truly watched, you don't doubt the signs your body picks up before your mind catches up. That morning, everything inside me told me that imprint wasn't leftover moisture or a figment of my imagination. It was a signature. I packed with a speed that bordered on frantic, stuffing everything into my pack without care for organization. But even as I hurried, I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting to see something standing between them, something long-limbed and quiet, something that breathed where it shouldn't. When I finally slung my pack over my shoulders and stepped onto the narrow trail that wove out of Owlwater Basin, I felt an instinctive pressure to keep moving, to get higher, to reach sunlight. The deeper parts of the woods felt heavier than before, as if the silence from the night had seeped into the soil. My footsteps were the only sounds. No birds, no rustling, no wind. I walked with a steady pace, but the unease never left my chest. Every few minutes, I felt the sensation of warm breath on the back of my neck, faint, almost imagined, but enough to make me stop, turn around, and see nothing. The climb out of the basin was steep, a long stretch of switchbacks lined with moss-covered boulders and fallen logs. As I ascended, the air gradually shifted. I heard a single bird call, short, abrupt, almost startled, then silence again. I realized something then. Sometimes the woods go quiet because something unfamiliar has moved through them. Animals sense what we can't. They know when they should hide. I reached a ridge with clearer air and brighter sunlight, but the tension didn't fade. My mind replayed the slow expansion of the tent fabric, the warm air hitting my face, the impression of ribs pushing outward. Over and over, the question haunted me. If the tent was breathing, what had filled it? By midday, I reached the small trail marker I'd passed on my way in, an old wooden post carved with a faded arrow pointing toward a creek junction another 3 miles ahead. I stopped to drink, and that's when I noticed something that didn't belong. A long tear running down the back of my backpack. A clean tear, straight as if made by a blade, but with fibers pulled inward, something had caught hold and tugged. I didn't remember brushing against anything sharp the previous day. I turned the pack around, inspecting it more carefully, and found a second mark, parallel to the first, but shallower, as if whatever touched the tent last night had reached for me too. The thought hit me hard, leaving my throat dry. Something had been inside the tent with me, or at least pressed against it, and that thing had followed me long enough to leave its marks on my gear. I forced myself to slow down then, to breathe, not because I felt calm, but because panic makes you clumsy. In the woods, clumsy gets you hurt, lost, gone. I had spent enough nights alone in the wild to know that fear magnifies danger, but it also provides honesty. A clean kind of honesty that strips away ego. And standing there, hands shaking slightly as I gripped the torn fabric, I finally admitted what I should have acknowledged the night before. I wasn't dealing with an illusion. I wasn't misunderstanding natural phenomena. Something was interacting with me, studying me, testing boundaries the same way a predator circles something new before deciding what to do with it. I tightened my straps and continued on, keeping my footsteps deliberate, my eyes scanning every shape in my peripheral vision. The forest felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, but I could feel it in my bones. The trees seemed to stand too close together, their trunks leaning subtly inward, like an audience watching a lone performer on stage. I walked faster. The trail descended toward a creek, and I felt relief when I finally heard the distant rumble of water. Natural sound. Normal sound. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were at the edge of the trail, pressed into a patch of soft mud near the water's edge. At first glance, they looked human. Long, narrow, deep impressions spaced close together, as though someone had walked barefoot along the creek. But they were longer than any human foot I'd ever seen. Too long. And the toes, if they were toes, were elongated, curved slightly, like something had gripped the mud rather than stepped in it. I knelt down, studying them, and felt the uneasy realization that the prints were fresh. The edges were clean. No water had eroded them. No leaves had fallen into them. They were made not long before I arrived. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady. Fear sharpens. Fear informs. I followed the prints with my eyes, tracing their path along the creek before they vanished into thicker brush. I didn't follow them. I wasn't that reckless. But the knowledge that something had passed through that area so recently, moving silently despite its size, made every sound, every crack of a twig, every shift of wind feel like a threat. I stood, wiped the mud from my fingers onto my pants, and resumed walking, but the forest felt alive behind me, as if the footprints weren't simply evidence of something passing through, but evidence of something that didn't want to be seen until it chose to be seen. I followed the trail along the creek, letting the steady rush of water anchor my thoughts, but there was a tension building inside me, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. The prints had been leading away from the basin, but the direction didn't matter anymore. I knew enough about the woods to understand a simple truth. If a creature wants to follow you, you don't track it, it tracks you. And the prints, disappearing abruptly into dense brush, didn't speak of fleeing. They spoke of something stepping off the path with intention, and something that didn't need a trail to navigate its domain. I tried to steady myself with that knowledge, knowing that fear was a tool, but there was a deeper, older fear rooted in instinct, telling me that whatever those prints belonged to had been watching me long before I noticed it at the creek. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the ground. The air cooled sharply, and the forest finally shifted, only slightly, but enough for me to feel movement in the canopy. Branches creaked overhead, not broken, not snapping, but creaking evenly, like something heavy shifting weight from one limb to another. I paused and looked up, scanning the web of branches crisscrossing the sky. Nothing, just needles and silhouettes. Yet the sound persisted, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. I listened carefully, and it dawned on me that the pattern echoed the same rhythm I heard inside the tent the night before. Inhale, exhale. Not a breath anymore, but a sway, a motion. Each creak matched that slow expansion of the tent walls. But now, it was above me. I didn't run. Running invites pursuit. Instead, I walked with purpose, eyes flicking between the trail ahead and the edges of my vision. My pulse thudded hard enough that I could hear it in my ears, but I forced myself to stay focused. The bends in the trail became more frequent, tight curves hugging the terrain. Every few minutes, the creaking above me would stop and the silence would return. Heavy, intentional, the kind of silence that means something is listening. When it started again, it moved farther behind, then closer, then above, then gone. The forest felt like it was rearranging itself around me. But that's impossible. Trees don't move. And yet that was the sensation, reshaping, shifting, circling. I thought at first that I was being hunted. But another part of me, one that had been dormant until now, began considering another possibility. What if it wasn't hunting me at all? What if it was learning me? Matching my pace, mimicking my breath, studying the cadence of my steps the same way it had mirrored the rise and fall of the tent during the night. A predator doesn't mirror. A predator stalks. But this felt different, like something was trying to understand me deeply, like intimately, the way I'd once tried to understand the woods. And that realization made the fear shift from sharp panic to a slow, creeping dread. Hunted or studied, either way, I didn't belong here. The trail flattened as I reached the wider portion near the creek junction. The rushing water had grown louder, thickening the air with moisture and movement. I could see sunlight reflecting off the surface, and for the first time since dawn, relief felt tangible. I stepped closer to the water's edge, hoping to refill my bottle, hoping to feel something normal beneath my hands. When I crouched down, I froze. In the reflection, distorted slightly by ripples but unmistakable, I saw movement behind me, a tall, elongated shape, not a defined figure, more like a silhouette stretching from the base of a tree, too tall to be human, too fluid to be animal. I whipped around, but the spot behind me was empty, just the forest, just the stillness. But the branches above me continued swaying where nothing else moved. I held my breath and looked back into the water. The silhouette was gone. Only my face stared back, eyes wide, jaw tense, the surface quivering from the slightest tremor in my hand. For a moment, I didn't know what scared me more. The idea that something was standing behind me, or the idea that it could move so silently I'd never hear it again. I capped my bottle without filling it, took one step back from the edge, and forced myself to keep walking. I didn't want to stay near water. Predators instinctively know water is where prey lets its guard down. And I wasn't about to be prey. The sun dipped lower, painting the forest in gold and gray. I needed to reach the trailhead by dusk, 5 miles away, but I knew I wouldn't make it before dark unless I pushed. Still, pushing too hard could make me sloppy. Sloppy meant broken ankles, lost footing, missed signs. So I controlled my pace, breathing deeply, scanning constantly. That's when I heard it, a second set of footsteps matching mine. Not synchronized, exactly opposite. When I lifted my right foot, something behind me lifted its left. When I stepped forward with my left, something behind me stepped forward with its right. A counter rhythm, a mirror. I stopped dead in my tracks. The other footsteps stopped too. I turned around slowly, slow enough that my movement wouldn't trigger anything sudden. The trail behind me was empty, framed by shadows and fading light. But silence doesn't always mean absence. I waited, 10 seconds, 20, 30. The stillness thickened. I swallowed hard, then took a single step backward. Behind me, from the trees, came the faintest suggestion of movement, like a foot sinking gently into soft earth. A mirrored step. I felt something shift inside me then. Not panic, not fear. Something deeper, an understanding. This wasn't random. This wasn't an attack. This was communication. Primitive, eerie, unsettling, but communication nonetheless. Something that breathed through my tent. Something that studied my patterns. Something that imprinted its presence onto the fabric. It wasn't chasing me. It was following me the way a shadow does, matching, mimicking, learning. And the woods, once my refuge, had become a place where I was no longer the observer, but the observed. I started walking again, slow and steady, every step deliberate. I no longer tried to outpace it. Something deep inside me, the part of a man that senses when he's being tested, not hunted, told me that if I ran, I'd break the rhythm it had built. And breaking that rhythm might be exactly what it was waiting for. So I moved forward like someone walking through a dream, one foot in front of the other, feeling the pulse of the forest sync with mine. My breath matched the faint echo behind me. Each inhale brought with it the faint warmth of that tent air, the memory of fabric expanding and collapsing as if the forest itself were breathing along with me. The air grew heavier as dusk bled into night. The trees seemed to stretch taller, their crowns lost to shadow. There's a point when darkness in the woods stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like presence, when every black space between trunks feels occupied. I reached a clearing soon after sunset, a small meadow hemmed in by pines, and I decided I couldn't keep moving blind. I needed a fire, light, some symbol of control in a place that had stripped me of it. My hands shook as I gathered twigs, then larger branches, arranging them into a small pyramid before striking the flint. Sparks caught, and the fire breathed to life. That sound, the crackle of burning wood, was the first real sound I'd heard since leaving the basin. I sat cross-legged before it, watching the flames lick upward, listening to the way the fire drew air, steady and alive. And then, from somewhere beyond the light, I heard it breathe back. Not a growl, not an animal's rasp. It was slow, deliberate, answering the rhythm of the fire as if mocking it. Every time the flames flared brighter and exhaled heat, I heard a faint inhale from the darkness. Then, when the flames softened, a low exhale followed, the same cadence as before, the same echo of life that had filled my tent. I clenched my jaw and spoke, not loudly, not bravely, just enough to break the tension. "What do you want?" My voice sounded small, strange in the vastness of the night. The breathing stopped immediately. Silence swallowed everything. Even the fire seemed to hesitate. For nearly a full minute, there was nothing. No sound, no motion. Then, barely audible, a whisper of wind drifted across the meadow, carrying a scent that made my stomach turn. Warm, damp, organic, like the air inside lungs. The fire flickered hard to one side, then steadied again. And when I looked past the flames into the dark, I saw it. Or rather, I saw its shape. Not defined by light, but by absence. an outline darker than the dark around it, tall and thin, moving between the trees with an unnatural grace. It didn't walk. It flowed. The shadows bent where it passed, like the forest leaned to make room for it. I wanted to move, to grab my pack, to do something, but I couldn't. My body wasn't frozen by fear. It was held still by recognition. Some part of me understood what I was looking at, even though my mind refused to name it. The shape stopped just outside the circle of light. I couldn't see a face, but I felt its attention, heavy and absolute. The fire crackled, sending a soft halo of sparks upward. For a fraction of a second, the glow illuminated its outline. Tall, ribbed, and translucent in parts, as if the skin itself were breathing, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the forest. My own breath hitched, sinking involuntarily with it. The longer I watched, the more the fear shifted into something else. An awful curiosity, an understanding that this thing wasn't attacking me because it didn't need to. It had no intention of harm. It was exploring. It had been inside my tent not to feed, but to feel, to imitate. I couldn't explain why I whispered what I did next. Maybe because silence had become unbearable. Maybe because part of me wanted to reach it before it reached deeper into me. "Stop," I said. "Please." The word please came out like a confession. The breathing halted instantly. The air felt thick enough to taste. Then, slow as dawn breaking, the creature, or whatever it was, took a single step closer. The edge of its form caught the firelight again, revealing a glint of moisture on what looked like skin, or maybe a membrane. The motion was both fluid and wrong, like watching smoke learn how to walk. I couldn't look away. I didn't blink. And in that stillness, I felt something inside my chest, an answering pulse that wasn't mine. It was breathing for me. The realization hit like a physical blow. Every breath I took felt heavier, slower, as if my lungs were no longer under my control. The rhythm that had haunted me since the tent was now inside me, syncing perfectly with the thing standing beyond the flames. When I exhaled, the fire dimmed. When I inhaled, it brightened. And in that eerie flicker, I understood. It wasn't just mirroring me anymore. It was connected. My breath had become its breath. My life force, whatever you want to call it, was now shared, looped between us through that terrible rhythm. I stumbled backward, gasping, breaking the pattern. The connection shattered like glass. The creature flinched or recoiled. It's hard to describe movement that doesn't obey human rules. Then it was gone. Not with sound or motion, but absence, like the space it occupied simply folded closed. The fire surged high for a brief second, then calmed. My chest ached as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. I fell to my knees, coughing, every inhale sharp and cold. The night remained still again, no breathing, no shadows moving, just the crackle of the fire and the echo of something that had touched me deeper than fear ever could. I didn't sleep that night. I fed the fire until dawn, watching the flames breathe in my place, wondering what it wanted to learn from me, or what it had already taken. When morning finally came, it felt fragile. The light didn't bring comfort, just color back into a world that had gone gray. The forest was no longer silent. Birds called from somewhere far away, hesitant, testing the air. I sat there watching the smoke rise from the last embers of the fire, my chest still tight. My breaths felt uneven, shallow, as though something inside me hadn't quite returned. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something quieter, like a hollow that used to be full. The woods around me looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. Every detail, the shimmer of dew on pine needles, the steam lifting off the creek, seemed to pulse in rhythm, like the entire forest was breathing in sync. I packed my things slowly, careful, aware of every sound. The tent fabric was cool to the touch now, no longer holding that strange warmth, but as I folded it, I noticed something new, a faint pattern across the inside wall. Not like before, not a mouth or ribs. This time it looked like the outline of two lungs, faintly traced in condensation, stretching across the nylon exactly where I had lain. I stopped folding and just stared at it. It wasn't possible. The shape was too symmetrical, too precise. It looked human, my size, my proportions, and the longer I stared, the more it faded, as if it were exhaling itself out of existence. I left the clearing without looking back. The trail wound downhill, sunlight cutting through branches, dappling the ground with warmth. Each step should have been comforting. I should have been relieved to leave that place behind. But relief didn't come. There was an invisible thread still connecting me to it, the same invisible breath that had filled my tent, the same awareness that had mirrored me through the trees. I tried to shake it off by focusing on small, practical things: water levels, compass bearings, landmarks. But deep down, I could feel the rhythm trying to match mine again, like an echo buried under my heartbeat. Around mid-morning, I came across another hiker, a rare thing in that remote area. He was an older man, gray-bearded, lean, the kind of person who'd spent his life in the woods. He nodded when he saw me, eyes sharp, scanning not just me but the space around me. "You camp up in Owlwater?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah," I said. "One night." He stared at me for a long moment, then looked past me toward the ridge I'd come from. "Used to be a village down there before the government bought the land," he said quietly. "Old families, trappers. They said the air moved strange, said the forest kept their dead voices." I didn't answer. He nodded again, almost like he'd expected silence. "You look like you've seen it," he said. "The breather." The way he said it, soft, matter-of-fact, made my stomach drop. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was naming it, giving form to something that shouldn't have form. "Don't stay in one place too long," he continued. "It learns the shape of what it touches." I wanted to ask him what that meant, but his tone made it clear. There was no explaining it. He gave a small nod, tipped his hat, and walked on without another word. His boots made almost no sound on the trail. I stood there until he disappeared around a bend. For a long while, I just listened, to the wind, to the trees, to my own breathing. Everything sounded wrong, not unnatural, just slightly delayed, like my exhale came half a second after I expected it to. I quickened my pace, driven by an instinct that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with survival. By afternoon, I reached the dirt road where my truck was parked. It looked almost out of place, too solid, too man-made against the living silence of the forest. I threw my pack in the back, slid behind the wheel, and just sat there with the engine off. I expected relief to wash over me, but instead there was a strange heaviness. The air inside the cab felt thick, humid. I wiped a sleeve across the windshield, expecting fog, but my hand came away damp, not with condensation but with warmth, like breath. My pulse spiked. I rolled down the windows, gulping the cold outside air. The truck felt wrong. The silence returned, pressing against my ears again. I started the engine and drove fast down that winding road, the kind that seemed endless even though I'd hiked it only a day before. The forest blurred past, green and gold and endless. But every so often I caught movement in my rearview mirror, shadows that shouldn't have been there, branches bending where there was no wind. Once, for just a second, I thought I saw something tall move between the trees in the reflection of the glass. It didn't chase me. It didn't need to. It just stood there, watching, as if reminding me that leaving didn't mean escaping. I didn't stop until I reached town. The first gas station on the edge of the highway felt like a checkpoint between two worlds. I parked, stepped out, and just stood in the bright morning light, surrounded by the sound of cars and voices and civilization. I should have felt safe, but I didn't, because when I exhaled, I could see my breath, warm and visible, even in the mid-June heat. That night, I slept inside for the first time in weeks, back in my apartment miles away from any tree line. I locked the windows, shut the blinds, left a lamp on. The city hum outside was constant. Sirens, engines, distant conversations. But sometime after midnight, I woke again to that sound, that slow, deep inhale, that deliberate exhale. The curtains near the window fluttered inward, though the window was sealed tight. The air was warm, too warm. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the faint outline of the curtains as they moved, rising, falling, like lungs. The room was breathing. My breath synced with it before I could stop it. And in that awful rhythm, I understood. The woods hadn't let me go. It had only changed its shape. The thing that had studied me out there had followed the pattern home. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't sleep in tents or even near open windows. I still hike sometimes, but never deep, never overnight. I breathe differently now, slow, measured, aware. Because sometimes in the dead of night, when I exhale, I hear another breath follow, not echoing mine, answering it. And in those moments, I remember that morning in Owlwater Basin, standing beside a tent that should have been empty but wasn't. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, I never left that place at all. Because somewhere out there in that valley of quiet trees and still air, something still remembers how I breathe.